My name is Juliet, and I am 34 years old. When my water broke at 2:30 in the morning, leaving me doubled over in agonizing pain, my husband Carter barely opened his eyes. He looked at me, complained about his upcoming investor pitch, and told me to take an Uber because he needed his sleep. I dragged myself to the hospital alone and nearly died on the operating table. 5 days later, he strutted into my VIP recovery suite, demanding to see his son for a photo opportunity. I simply smiled from my chair, looked him dead in the eye, and asked, "What baby?" Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind an arrogant partner exactly who holds the real power. Growing up, my grandfather always taught me that true wealth whispers, while fake wealth screams. I took that lesson to heart. As a forensic accountant, I spent my days quietly examining ledgers, tracking hidden assets, and unraveling complex financial puzzles. I lived a modest, unassuming life, deliberately hiding the fact that I controlled the massive private equity trust of my late grandfather. Carter, my husband of 6 years, was the exact opposite. I was a flashy, ambitious tech founder whose entire existence revolved around appearances, networking events, and projecting the image of a wildly successful Silicon Valley visionary. To him, I was just a boring bookkeeper who balanced his household budget and served as a quiet, stable backdrop to his chaotic startup lifestyle. I never told him about my true financial status because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I owned. That desire for genuine connection kept me blind to his narcissism for far too long. The reality of our marriage finally shattered on a remarkably cold Tuesday night. We lived in an upscale suburban neighborhood, surrounded by manicured lawns and homes that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Carter had insisted on the house, claiming we needed the right address to impress his potential investors. I had paid the down payment, though he told everyone his company covered it. At 2:30 in the morning, a sudden blinding pain ripped through my abdomen. I gasped, my eyes flying open in the pitch-black bedroom. I was 38 weeks pregnant, and my doctor had assured me we still had plenty of time. But my body was telling a very different story. A second contraction hit, sharper and more violent than the first. It felt as though a vice was tightening around my lower back, squeezing the breath right out of my lungs. I kicked off the heavy duvet and tried to sit up, but the pain forced me to double over. That was when I felt it. A sudden warm rush of fluid soaked through my pajamas and cascaded down my legs. My water had broken. It splashed heavily onto the imported Brazilian hardwood floor that Carter prized so much. Panic surged through my veins, cold and sharp, completely overriding my sleepy haze. I needed to get to the hospital immediately. The baby was coming early, and the intensity of the pain warned me that something was not quite right. I reached across the massive king-size bed, my hand trembling as I grasped the shoulder of Carter. He was deeply asleep, his breathing slow and even completely oblivious to the nightmare unfolding just inches away. I shook him gently at first, not wanting to startle him, but the urgency of my situation quickly took over. "Carter," I whispered, my voice tight with strain. "Carter, wake up, please, the baby is coming." He groaned, shifting away from my touch and pulling the expensive silk sheets higher around his neck. His face was buried in the pillow, his thick dark hair messy from sleep. For a moment I thought he had not heard me. Another contraction rolled through my body, forcing a sharp cry from my lips. I gripped his shoulder harder and shook him again. "Carter, you need to wake up right now. My water just broke and we have to go to the hospital." This time he slowly opened his eyes, squinting against the darkness. He let out a long, irritated sigh, the kind of sound a person makes when they are inconvenienced by a minor annoyance like a delayed flight or a wrong coffee order. He propped himself up on one elbow and looked down at me. Then his gaze shifted to the floor, landing on the puddle of fluid staining the pristine wood. His handsome face contorted into a deep scowl. The annoyance in his eyes was so profound it made my breath hitch. There was no alarm. There was no concern for my well-being or the safety of our unborn son. There was only pure, unfiltered irritation at the mess I had made. "Are you kidding me?" he said, his voice thick with sleep and heavy with disgust. I stared at him, unable to process his reaction. I was clutching my stomach, panting through the agonizing waves of pain, and he was staring at the floorboards. "Carter, it hurts." I managed to say, tears of fear pricking the corners of my eyes. Please grab the hospital bag. It is in the closet. We need to leave right now. He rubbed his face in obvious frustration, running his hands through his hair before glaring down at me. He did not move to get out of bed. He did not reach for his phone to call for help. He just sat there looking at me as if I had intentionally orchestrated this entire medical emergency simply to ruin his night. I have a pitch meeting with Harrison tomorrow, he said, his tone cold and remarkably steady. It is a $10 million deal. I need my sleep. Take an Uber. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For a second, the sheer absurdity of what he had just said completely paralyzed me. The pain of the contraction temporarily faded into the background, eclipsed by the massive, crushing weight of his betrayal. My husband, the man who had promised to love and protect me, was telling me to call a taxi while I was in active, complicated labor, because his investor meeting was more important than the life of our child. But Carter, I pleaded, hoping that he was just disoriented from waking up so suddenly. I cannot drive. I cannot even stand up properly. Something feels wrong. Please, I need you. He let out another loud sigh. He reached over to his nightstand, picking up his noise-canceling earplugs. He did not even look at me as he spoke his final words of the night. I cannot afford to be exhausted tomorrow, Juliet. You are a grown woman. Figure it out. With that, he pushed the earplugs into his ears, rolled over to face the opposite wall, and pulled the heavy duvet up over his shoulders. He turned his back on me, completely shutting me out of his world, choosing his startup, his money, and his precious sleep over his wife and his unborn child. I knelt there on the cold hardwood floor, surrounded by the mess of my broken water, gasping for air as another fierce contraction ripped through my body. The illusion of my marriage shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The cold reality of Carter turning his back on me was sharper than any physical pain. I did not waste another second, begging a man who had already made his choice. Survival instinct took over. I pushed myself up from the soaked floor, my body trembling. Every movement sent a fresh wave of agony radiating from my lower back to my knees, but I forced myself to put one foot in front of the other. I grabbed a towel from the bathroom to wrap around my waist and threw on a winter coat. I snatched my purse and keys from the dresser. I cast one final look at the bed where my husband lay sleeping peacefully, his earplugs firmly in place. That image of him perfectly comfortable while I was fighting for two lives would burn into my memory forever. I made my way down the sweeping staircase of our Silicon Valley home. The house was completely silent. It was a sprawling property that Carter loved to show off to his tech friends, but walking through it alone in the middle of the night, it felt like an empty museum. I managed to reach the garage and climbed into my sedan. It sat in stark contrast to the luxury sports car Carter leased to project his successful image. I started the engine and backed out into the dark, quiet streets of our neighborhood. Another contraction hit me as I turned onto the main road. It was so intense that my vision temporarily blurred, and I had to grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I took a deep breath and pressed the voice command button on my steering wheel. I told the system to call the hospital emergency triage line. The phone rang 3 times before a calm professional woman answered. I told her I was 38 weeks pregnant. My water had broken, and the contractions were less than 3 minutes apart. I also reported significant bleeding that started right after leaving my house. The nurse shifted from routine to highly concerned. Nancy asked if I was the one driving. Here, I was alone behind the wheel. She urged me to pull over and wait for an ambulance. I refused, explaining. I was only 10 minutes away from the emergency room. Where is your husband? Nancy asked, her voice thick with confusion. Is there anyone else who can drive you? I kept my eyes fixed on the empty highway ahead. My husband is asleep at home, I said, keeping my voice level despite the searing pain. He is a busy startup founder. He has a massive pitch meeting with his lead investor tomorrow morning to secure $10 million. He said he could not be disturbed and I should take an Uber. A heavy silence fell over the line as Nancy processed the sheer callousness of my words. He let you drive yourself while bleeding? She asked, her composure slipping for a second. I did not look long enough to see the blood, I explained. He just saw the mess and got angry to him. I am just his bookkeeper, managing his household budget and balancing company ledgers. I am just the quiet background character, keeping his numbers straight while he changes the world. Carter constantly reminded me his visionary tech ambitions were the priority, while my career as an auditor was uninspiring. He had no idea the kind of financial power I actually held or the complex trust I managed. I had hidden my wealth to find genuine love, but that secrecy now felt like a cruel joke. You are not just a bookkeeper, Nancy said firmly. You are bringing a child into this world and doing an incredibly brave thing. Keep talking to me. What do you see on the road? I focused on her voice against the rising panic. I told her I was taking the final exit for the hospital. The pain was escalating rapidly, shifting from distinct contractions into one continuous agonizing grip around my entire midsection. The bleeding worsened, soaking the thick towel and staining the car seat. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, and my hand slipped on the steering wheel. I am almost there, I gasped, pressing my foot down on the accelerator. But something feels terribly wrong, Nancy. The pain is not stopping. It is just constant now. I have an emergency team waiting for you at the front doors, Nancy promised. Just pull right up to the valet circle. Do not worry about parking the car. We are going to take care of you and your baby. I turned the steering wheel, navigating the final curve into the hospital complex. The bright red emergency sign illuminated the night sky, cutting through the darkness like a beacon. I pushed the car up the ramp toward the main entrance, my breathing coming in short, frantic bursts. The physical agony was immense, but the emotional terror was even worse. I was entirely alone, facing the real possibility that my son was in severe distress. I slammed on the brakes as the car lurched into the circular driveway under the brightly lit awning of the emergency room. The vehicle had barely come to a stop before I shifted it into park. My entire body felt heavy and uncoordinated. I pushed the door open and fell onto the concrete pavement. The cold night air hit my face, but it did not clear the dizzying fog clouding my brain. A young valet, wearing a yellow jacket, rushed forward, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of me. I was hunched over, clutching my stomach with one hand and holding onto the open car door with the other. Blood was visibly dripping down my legs, pooling on the concrete by my shoes. Do you need a wheelchair? He asked, his voice high-pitched with sudden panic. I forced my hand to uncurl from the metal door handle and held out my keys to him. I dropped them directly into his waiting palm without saying a single word. He looked completely terrified, unsure of what to do next. I turned away from the parked car, leaving it running with the driver door wide open, and began to stagger toward the automatic sliding glass doors of the emergency room lobby. Every shallow breath I took burned my lungs fiercely, but I just kept moving forward. The bright fluorescent lights of the main hospital entrance blinded me completely, making the room spin wildly. I could hear voices shouting ahead of me. Medical staff in blue scrubs were running toward the doors, pushing a gurney over the polished tile floor. Nancy must have alerted them exactly as she promised. I tried to walk toward them to tell them my name and explain what was happening, but my legs simply refused to support my weight any longer. The last thing I remember before the darkness completely overtook me was the feeling of my knees hitting the hard tile floor. Hands were suddenly grabbing my shoulders, pulling me upward, lifting me onto the gurney. The chaotic sounds of the hospital slowly faded away into a dull, distant ringing roar. I closed my heavy eyes, taking one last shallow breath, praying desperately that my precious little unborn son would somehow survive the night, while my husband slept peacefully in our quiet suburban home, completely unaware of the terrible wreckage that he had caused tonight. I drifted back into the waking world, not with a gentle awakening, but with the sharp sting of an oxygen mask being pressed firmly over my face and the frantic, high-pitched beeping of medical machinery. The harsh fluorescent lights of the surgical theater burned through my eyelids as I forced them open. A dozen voices echoed around me, clipping short commands that sounded terrifyingly urgent. Someone was strapping my arms to padded armrests, while another nurse rapidly inserted a second intravenous line into the back of my trembling hand. I tried to turn my head, searching the sterile room for a familiar face, but there was no one. only doctors and nurses moving with a focused intensity that made my heart hammer wildly against my ribs. A woman with kind eyes peering over a blue surgical mask leaned close to my face. She introduced herself as Dr. Ramirez and placed a firm, reassuring hand on my bare shoulder. She told me that my son was experiencing severe fetal distress. His heart rate was dropping rapidly with every contraction, and the heavy bleeding I had experienced in the car was due to a placental abruption. There was no time for a natural delivery or even a proper epidural block. They had to perform an emergency cesarean section right that very second if they were going to save his life. She shoved a clipboard against my chest, guiding my weak fingers to sign the consent forms. I scribbled something that barely looked like my name, tears spilling hot and fast down my cold cheeks. The anesthesia hit my bloodstream like a tidal wave of ice. As the heavy darkness pulled me under, my last conscious thought was a terrifying realization that I might die right there on that operating table, leaving my newborn son completely at the mercy of a father who could not even be bothered to answer his phone. Facing death completely alone without someone holding your hand was a truly unique kind of agony. I fought against the creeping shadows, trying desperately to stay anchored to the living world for the sake of my baby. But the medical sedatives were simply too strong. When I finally opened my eyes again, the harsh surgical lights had been replaced by the soft, dim glow of a recovery ward. My mouth felt as dry as sandpaper, and my entire lower body was completely numb, weighed down by thick, heavy hospital blankets. The steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor provided a comforting backdrop to the quiet room. I tried to shift my weight, but a sudden sharp pain in my abdomen quickly reminded me of the violent, invasive surgery I had just endured. A nurse wearing light pink scrubs noticed me stirring and immediately hurried over to my bedside. She had a warm maternal presence that instantly made me want to cry all over again. Her name tag read Jackie. She checked my vitals and offered me a small plastic cup of ice chips, which felt like pure heaven against my parched throat. I desperately asked her about my baby, my voice coming out as a raspy, broken whisper. Jackie smiled a wide, genuine smile that finally eased the crushing anxiety sitting heavy on my chest. She told me I had a beautiful, perfectly healthy baby boy. I had swallowed some fluid during the traumatic delivery and was currently being monitored in the neonatal intensive care unit, just as a strict precaution, but he was breathing well on his own and was incredibly strong. The overwhelming wave of relief that crashed over me was so profound it left me dizzy. My son had survived. We had both survived against the odds. Then I asked the question that still lingered like a dark shadow in the back of my mind. I asked if Carter had arrived at the hospital yet. I reasoned that surely by now he had woken up, seen the empty bed, noticed the blood on the floor, and rushed straight to the emergency room in a panic. Jackie lost her warm smile and her expression shifted into one of deep, uncomfortable pity. That specific look of pity was something I would become intimately familiar with over the next few hours. She gently placed a hand over mine and told me that they had been trying to reach my husband since the exact moment I was wheeled into the operating room. Jackie explained that the surgery had been incredibly complicated. I had hemorrhaged badly on the table, losing a dangerous amount of blood. There was a terrifying period where the surgical team actually thought they might lose me entirely. The hospital staff had designated my situation as a critical trauma emergency. Over the course of the grueling 14-hour ordeal, the administration desk, the nursing staff, and the attending physicians had called Carter on his cell phone over 30 times. They had left frantic voice messages pleading with him to come to the hospital immediately because his wife was in critical condition and his son was being delivered prematurely. Every single one of those 30 calls had gone straight to voicemail. I stared at the acoustic ceiling tiles above my bed, letting the magnitude of that information slowly sink into my exhausted brain. 14 hours had passed since I dragged myself out of our house. My husband, the man who had promised to cherish me in sickness and in health, had completely ignored 36 emergency calls from a major medical center. He had not bothered to check his phone, or perhaps he had seen the caller identification and deliberately hit the ignore button because he did not want to be distracted before his crucial investor pitch. The nurses in the recovery ward walked past my bed with their heads bowed, speaking in hushed tones, avoiding my gaze because they did not know what to say to a woman whose husband had so thoroughly abandoned her during the most vulnerable moment of her entire life. A few hours later, the door to my recovery suite swung open, and a neonatal nurse wheeled in a clear plastic bassinet. Inside, wrapped tightly in a striped receiving blanket, was my newborn son. He was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and small fists curled tightly against his chest. The nurse carefully lifted him out and placed him directly into my waiting arms. The moment his warm, fragile body rested against my chest, the rest of the world completely vanished. All the physical pain, all the lingering fear, all the devastating emotional betrayal of the past 14 hours instantly melted away. I pressed my lips to his soft forehead, breathing in the sweet, powdery scent of him. I whispered a quiet promise into his ear, swearing that I would protect him from everything and everyone, including the man who shared his DNA. As I sat there rocking my beautiful boy Jackie, returned to the room carrying a clear plastic belongings bag. She set it gently on the tray table next to my bed. She mentioned that my purse and winter coat had been recovered from the emergency room lobby where I had dropped them. She pulled out my smartphone and placed it softly on the mattress beside me, suggesting that maybe I should try calling my husband myself, now that the surgery was over and I was safely in recovery. She offered a hopeful, albeit strained smile, trying to give Carter the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps he had just left his phone on silent, she offered weakly. I knew better, but I picked up the phone anyway. The screen illuminated the dim hospital room. There were no missed calls from Carter. There were no frantic text messages demanding to know where I was or why there was a puddle of water and blood on his imported hardwood floors. There was only a single unread text message resting at the top of my notifications screen. It had been sent 20 minutes ago. My thumb hovered over the smooth glass screen for a long moment before I tapped the message to open it. I expected a pathetic excuse or perhaps a selfish complaint about me taking the sedan and leaving him stranded before his important meeting. Instead, the words displayed on the glowing screen made the blood freeze in my veins. It did not ask about the baby or if I was even alive. It read simply, "Room 402 was amazing. See you at the pitch, gorgeous." I read the short sentences 3 times, ensuring my exhausted brain processed them correctly. Room 402. Gorgeous. It was a text message meant for someone else. Carter had not been sleeping peacefully in our marital bed all morning. He had not been reviewing his financial projections or practicing his investor pitch in his home office. He had been in a hotel room with a mistress. He had sent the message to me by accident, likely firing it off as he hurried to meet his top priority. I did not burst into tears. I did not throw the phone against the hospital wall or scream out in agonizing heartbreak. The woman who would have cried over Carter, the quiet, unassuming bookkeeper, who just wanted a simple, loving family, died on that operating table 14 hours ago. As I stared at those 2 damning sentences while holding my innocent fatherless son, my overwhelming grief instantly evaporated. It was entirely consumed by a cold, calculated, and absolute resolve. Carter had fundamentally misunderstood who he had married. He thought he was discarding a helpless, dependent wife. He had no idea he had just declared war on a woman who held the ultimate power to dismantle his entire existence, and I was going to make sure he lost everything. I carefully placed my sleeping son back into his clear plastic bassinet, making sure the soft cotton blanket was tucked securely around his tiny, fragile shoulders. My hands were remarkably steady, despite the trauma my body had just endured. The paralyzing fear that had gripped me in the car and the overwhelming despair that had choked me only moments ago were completely gone. I pressed the red call button attached to the side of my bed rail. Joanne appeared in the open doorway a few seconds later, her kind eyes full of quiet concern. I asked her to hand me the sleek silver laptop from my belongings bag sitting on the rolling tray. She hesitated slightly, glancing at the heart monitor and gently reminding me that I had just survived a major surgical trauma and catastrophic blood loss. She quietly suggested that I should be resting and recovering rather than worrying about work emails or household budgets. I offered her a polite but firm smile and told her that completing a small, familiar task would actually help me relax my racing mind. Reluctantly, she pulled the computer from the plastic bag and set it gently across my lap, adjusting the table so it would not press against my fresh surgical incision. Carter had always treated my career as a tedious, boring joke. To him, I was just a glorified human calculator who balanced his household checkbook and made sure his startup company payroll ran on time. He loved to brag at exclusive Silicon Valley dinner parties about his disruptive vision and his brilliant coding skills, while casually dismissing my profession with a patronizing pat on the head. What his towering narcissism had never allowed him to realize was that a highly trained forensic accountant possesses a very unique and dangerous set of skills. We do not just count money, we track it. We follow the invisible digital threads that guilty people try desperately to hide. We find the dirty secrets buried deep within the mundane ledgers. Carter genuinely believed his personal accounts and corporate servers were impenetrable fortresses of high-level encryption. I was painfully and predictably wrong. He was sloppy, arrogant, and utterly blind to his own digital vulnerabilities. I opened the laptop, and the familiar blue glow of the screen illuminated my pale face in the dim, quiet hospital room. I bypassed the standard login screens and quickly opened a highly secure virtual private network connection. Months ago, when Carter had asked me to audit his initial seed funding expenditures, I had quietly established backdoor access protocols into his primary financial dashboards. I had done it initially to fix his accounting errors before the board of directors noticed his remarkably sloppy bookkeeping practices. Now I was using those exact same administrative privileges to completely dismantle his life. I flexed my stiff fingers, wincing slightly at the uncomfortable pull of the intravenous line taped to the back of my hand, and began to type with rapid precision. I started directly with his personal email archives. Carter was far too vain to ever delete his correspondence, believing his custom passwords made him completely invincible. It took me less than 3 minutes to bypass his security questions using simple variations of his own company's slogans and his favorite ego-boosting phrases. The inbox loaded with a soft digital chime that sounded incredibly loud in the silent room. I bypassed the standard business correspondence and went straight for his travel and reservation folders. I typed the specific date of his supposed critical investor pitch into the search bar. The results populated instantly across my screen. There was no conference room booking in San Francisco. There was no dinner reservation at a high-end steakhouse with Harrison. Instead, there was a detailed confirmation receipt for a luxury weekend getaway at a highly exclusive boutique resort nestled deep in the rolling green hills of Napa Valley. The reservation was listed under his name, and it explicitly requested their premium romance package, including rose petals and chilled champagne upon arrival. I read through the itemized itinerary attached to the confirmation email with cold detachment. He had coordinated a private wine tasting, a romantic hot air balloon ride at dawn, and a secluded sunset dinner. All of this was happening while I was 38 weeks pregnant. All of this was carefully planned while I was bleeding on our hardwood floor and begging for his help to save our child. I did not stop at the email inbox because I needed the full financial picture to trap him completely. I opened a new browser tab and accessed the corporate banking portal for his startup company. I pulled up the real-time transaction logs for his primary company credit card. The charges from the past 48 hours painted a vivid and sickening picture of his massive betrayal. There was a charge for $800 at a premium champagne vineyard. There was a $1,200 charge for an extended couples massage at the luxury resort spa. The most damning transaction was processed just 2 hours before I had driven myself to the emergency room in absolute agony. It was a charge for $4,500 at a high-end boutique jeweler located directly inside the resort lobby. He was buying expensive diamond jewelry with corporate funds. The same company that was legally tethered to my personal name as his primary financial guarantor. He was not just cheating on his pregnant wife. He was committing blatant corporate fraud to finance his disgusting affair. The sheer monumental stupidity of his actions gave me every single piece of ammunition I needed to destroy him. I opened a secure encrypted folder on my desktop and began systematically downloading every single piece of evidence. I saved the hotel confirmation emails, the spy receipts, the jewelry store transactions, and the highly detailed romance itinerary. I took high-resolution screenshots of his misdirected text message on my mobile phone and uploaded those image files directly into the folder as well. I worked with a cold, methodical, and relentless precision. My physical pain from the emergency cesarean section was entirely muted by the pure adrenaline coursing through my veins. Every single keystroke was a calculated strategic strike against the man who had abandoned me and left our innocent son to die. I created 3 separate backup files copying the entire cache of evidence to offshore cloud servers that Carter could never possibly trace, corrupt, or access. I watched the green progress bar slowly fill the screen, feeling a profound sense of ultimate clarity wash over my tired mind. I was meticulously building an inescapable steel trap. Carter thought he had walked away from an annoying inconvenience to enjoy a luxurious weekend with his secret mistress. I thought he could return on his own convenient schedule, put on a charming smile, and play the role of the devoted father whenever it suited his public relations narrative. He had absolutely no idea that while he was pouring expensive champagne and buying illicit diamonds, his quiet, boring wife had just secured the digital keys to his complete and total destruction. I closed the laptop with a satisfying click and leaned back against the hospital pillows, listening to the gentle breathing of my newborn son, preparing for the next step. I needed to know exactly who was on the receiving end of that message. The text itself was just the smoking gun, but I needed the bullet to ensure his complete destruction. I opened the detailed folio of the resort confirmation that I had just downloaded to my secure drive. The billing address matched his corporate office, but there was an additional section for the guest registry. Carter had paid extra for a private tasting tour in the valley. The digital waiver for the wine tour required 2 names for liability purposes. He had filled out his own name, and right below it was the name of his guest. Veronica, just a first name. No last name was listed on the waiver, but it was enough of a starting point to narrow my search. I shifted my focus away from the corporate banking portal and navigated back to his personal email archives. I ran a targeted query for the name Veronica across all his folders. Thousands of irrelevant results populated the screen, ranging from old college acquaintances to random marketing newsletters. I refined the search parameters, adding the exact dates he had been traveling over the past 6 months. The refined search yielded a very curious result. There were several monthly billing receipts from a prepaid mobile network provider. Carter had a burner phone. He used his primary personal email as a backup recovery contact for the prepaid account, which was a monumental lapse in basic digital security. I clicked on the most recent receipt and used the recovery link to access the call and text logs stored on the provider server. The phone logs revealed a staggering amount of communication with a single unlisted number. They had exchanged hundreds of messages and spent hours on phone calls, usually late at night, when Carter claimed he was working late at the office fixing code. I felt a brief, sharp sting of retroactive humiliation thinking about how many times I had brought him hot coffee and dinner while he sat in his home office secretly whispering to another woman. But I pushed that feeling aside. I was not a victim anymore. I was an investigator gathering the final pieces of a puzzle. I ran a reverse trace on the unlisted phone number, using a series of specialized search tools I kept for auditing complex corporate profiles. The search cross-referenced public records, social media tags, and registered property deeds. The loading icon spun for a few seconds before generating a comprehensive background profile. A high-resolution photograph filled my screen. She was a beautiful woman in her late 20s with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive designer smile. The name attached to the profile hit me with the force of a freight train. It was Veronica, the young glamorous wife of David Harrison. Harrison was the billionaire venture capitalist who was supposed to be funding Carter and his entire tech startup. Hay was the investor Carter needed to secure his $10 million seed funding. I stared at the smiling photograph, completely paralyzed by his breathtaking arrogance. Carter was not just cheating on his pregnant wife. Hay was sleeping with the wife of the man who held his entire professional future in his hands. He was having a reckless, highly documented affair with his absolute financial lifeline. The true horror of the situation ran much deeper than a simple affair. Carter had paid for the luxury resort massages, dinners, and the $4,000 diamond jewelry using his corporate credit card. He had essentially stolen company funds to wine and dine the wife of the very man he was begging for investment capital. And because he had structured his startup with sloppy legal shortcuts, he had listed me as the primary financial guarantor on those corporate credit accounts. If Harrison audited the finances, he would immediately see the explicit misuse of corporate funds. Carter had not only jeopardized his own career, but he had legally tethered my name to his fraudulent spending. He was literally betting my financial security to fund his infidelity. The realization ignited a slow-burning fury deep within my chest, but it was a remarkably clear, focused kind of anger. Carter had always believed he was the smartest person in any room. He loved to parade around Silicon Valley networking events, pitching his disruptive ideas and acting like he was an untouchable genius. In reality, he was a careless, reckless fool who left a trail of digital breadcrumbs so obvious a first-year accounting student could have found them. I closed the profile of Veronica and opened a new encrypted document. I took deliberate high-resolution screenshots of every single text log, every phone record, and every piece of identifying information that linked the burner phone to the resort charges. I compiled the evidence into a pristine, irrefutable timeline. I matched the timestamps of the text messages to the credit card swipes, mapping out exactly what he was doing and buying while I was lying on an operating table bleeding out. I thought about the pitch meeting Carter was supposed to be preparing for right now. He had likely spent the entire evening sipping expensive wine with Veronica, bragging about how he was going to conquer the tech world. He probably felt incredibly powerful, pulling the wool over the eyes of a billionaire investor while sleeping with his beautiful wife. He believed he was manipulating everyone around him with perfect execution. He had absolutely no idea that his quiet, boring wife had just gathered enough explosive material to level his entire existence to the ground. I felt a sudden dark sense of satisfaction washing away the remaining physical aches from my surgery. The pain in my abdomen was a distant secondary concern compared to the intricate trap I was currently building. I was meticulously organizing a financial and personal guillotine that would sever him from everything he valued. I organized the files into a single master portfolio, locking it behind a dual authentication password that only I could access. I placed a copy of the portfolio onto the offshore cloud servers, ensuring that even if my laptop was destroyed or confiscated, the evidence would survive. I reviewed the final compilation, making sure there were no gaps in the timeline and no way for him to claim the documents were fabricated. The paper trail was absolute perfection. Every charge was tied directly to his name and every text message confirmed his location. I leaned back against the stiff hospital pillows, taking a slow, deep breath as I looked at the sleeping baby in the bassinet beside my bed. My beautiful, innocent son deserved a life free from the toxic chaos of a father who would sacrifice his own family for a moment of fleeting pleasure. Carter had made his choices, and now he was going to face the catastrophic consequences of his own monumental stupidity. I closed the laptop and set it carefully on the tray table. The quiet hum of the hospital room felt completely different now. It was no longer a place of recovery or fear. It was the staging ground for a war that Carter did not even know he was fighting. I gently reached out and rested my hand on the edge of the clear plastic bassinet, making a silent promise to my child. I was going to strip away every single thing that gave his father power. He was completely finished now. The sharp trill of my cell phone vibrating against the hard plastic of the hospital tray table shattered the heavy silence of the room. I slowly turned my head to look at the glowing screen. The caller identification displayed a professionally posed photograph of Beatrice, my mother-in-law. Under normal circumstances, a call from a grandmother just hours after her daughter-in-law went into labor would be an expression of frantic worry and overwhelming love. But I had spent 7 years in the trenches with Carter and his family. I knew exactly what kind of woman Beatrice was. She was a fiercely elitist socialite who viewed every human interaction as a transaction and every family member as an extension of her own personal brand. I reached out and swiped the green button to accept the call, lifting the phone to my ear. I did not even have the chance to say hello before her voice cut through the line, sharp and biting. Juliet, what on earth is wrong with you? Beatrice demanded. Her tone was completely devoid of warmth, sounding more like a frustrated corporate manager dealing with an incompetent employee than a grandmother. Carter just called me from Napa. He tells me you were harassing his phone all morning during his crucial investor retreat. When are you going to stop being so terribly needy, Juliet? I lay there in my hospital bed, listening to the steady beep of my heart monitor, while my mother-in-law scolded me for bleeding on her son's schedule. She did not ask if the baby had been born. She did not ask if I was okay. Her only concern was that I had inconvenienced her golden boy during his luxury weekend. He is building a legacy. Beatrice continued, her voice dripping with absolute condescension. He is trying to secure $10 million to change the tech industry, and you are dragging him down with your endless dramatics. You knew how important this weekend was for him. Harrison is the most vital connection Carter has ever made, and you chose today of all days to throw a tantrum and demand his attention. I remained perfectly silent, letting her toxic words wash over me. For years I had absorbed this exact kind of verbal abuse, shrinking myself down to keep the peace. Beatrice had never hidden her profound disappointment that Carter had married a plain, boring bookkeeper instead of a wealthy Silicon Valley heiress. From the very first day we met, she had treated me like a temporary fixture, a useful stepping stone who could manage her son's taxes and keep his house clean until he became rich enough to upgrade to a more glamorous model. You need to pull yourself together, Beatrice snapped, her impatience growing at my continued silence. Just have the baby quietly and stop making a scene. You need to be discharged and back at the house by Thursday. Carter arranged for a major magazine photographer to come to the house on Friday morning. He needs the perfect family man angle for his public relations campaign before the seed funding closes. I expect you to have the nursery spotless and for you to look presentable for once. Do not ruin this for him, Juliet. Her vicious rant perfectly encapsulated everything her family represented. I was not a person to them. I was a plain, useful incubator, hired to produce an heir, and then quietly fade into the background while Carter stood in the spotlight. They wanted me to smile for the cameras, pretend we had a perfect marriage, and then disappear back into my home office to balance their checkbooks. Are you even listening to me? Beatrice demanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. I am listening, Beatrice, I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper that held absolutely no emotion. I hear you perfectly. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button to end the call. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not try to explain that her precious son was currently committing corporate fraud to sleep with the wife of the investor he was supposedly pitching. Arguing with Beatrice was a waste of breath, and I was done wasting anything on that family. I set the phone down on the mattress and turned my head to look at my newborn son sleeping peacefully in his clear plastic bassinet. He looked so incredibly fragile, swaddled in his soft hospital blankets. He was pure and innocent, entirely untouched by the ugly greed and narcissism that infected his father's bloodline. I was never going to let Carter or Beatrice warp his mind or use him as a convenient prop for their shallow public relations campaigns. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, gathering my strength. The pain from my surgical incision throbbed, a steady reminder of the physical toll of my independence. But my mind had never been sharper. For 34 years I had lived exactly as my grandfather had instructed. I had kept my head down, lived below my means, and protected the secret of my immense inherited wealth. I had wanted to build a normal, quiet life, but normal had almost gotten me killed tonight, and quiet had allowed parasites like Carter and Beatrice to believe they could walk all over me. I picked up my phone again and opened a specialized, highly secure application hidden deep within my folders. It was a direct encrypted communication line that I had not used in over 5 years. I dialed a specific 12-digit international number. The line rang twice before connecting across the globe to a private wealth management firm located in the heart of Geneva, Switzerland. A man answered the phone, speaking in crisp, professional French, before I smoothly switched the conversation to English. It was Henri, my primary portfolio manager. He sounded surprised to hear from me, given my usual insistence on annual written reports rather than direct verbal contact. Henri Vester said, keeping my voice absolutely steady and commanding. We have a significant shift in protocol. Of course, madame, he replied, instantly sensing the gravity in my tone. How may we assist you today? It is time to unlock the Vanguard Trust, I said. There was a brief pause on the line as the weight of my instruction registered. The Vanguard Trust was not just a simple bank account. It was a massive, sprawling private equity fortress holding billions of dollars in diversified global assets, real estate acquisitions, and corporate debt notes. It was the financial empire my grandfather had spent 80 years building, and it had been sitting completely dormant waiting for my command. Consider it done, Madame Henri said, his voice turning incredibly sharp and focused. All administrative blocks will be removed immediately. What are your initial directives? I need two things right now, I told him, staring at the blank wall of my hospital room. First, I need you to dispatch our most aggressive corporate acquisition team. They need to be ready to move massive amounts of capital by tomorrow morning. Second, I need you to retain Elias, the family law attorney. Elias was the most ruthless, terrifyingly efficient corporate litigation and family law attorney in the entire state of California. He was the kind of lawyer billionaires hired when they wanted to completely obliterate their opponents without leaving a single trace of evidence behind. He did not take normal cases. He only took wars. He requires a substantial retainer for immediate emergency mobilization, Henri noted smoothly. Pay him whatever he asks, I replied without hesitation. Tell him I need him standing in my hospital room at the earliest possible hour tomorrow morning. Tell him we are initiating a hostile takeover of both a corporate entity and a marital estate simultaneously. I will make the arrangements personally, Madame Henri assured me. The Vanguard Trust is fully operational. We await your further instructions. I ended the secure call and placed the phone back on the tray table. A deep, powerful sense of calm settled over my exhausted body. I was no longer just the boring suburban bookkeeper holding on to a terrible marriage out of some misguided desire for a traditional family. I was the majority shareholder of a financial juggernaut, stepping out of the shadows to protect my son. Carter and his mother thought they held all the power because they lived in a world of loud, flashy illusions. They were about to learn a devastating lesson about what real quiet power actually looked like when it was finally unleashed. I closed my eyes and let the steady hum of the hospital room lull me into a very light, restful sleep, knowing that by tomorrow morning, the ground beneath my husband's feet would begin to crumble completely. The morning light filtered through the horizontal blinds of my hospital suite, casting long, pale shadows across the sterilized floor. I had not slept, but my mind was remarkably sharp, fueled by a quiet, burning adrenaline. At precisely 7 o'clock, the heavy wooden door to my room swung open. The man who stepped across the threshold did not look like a typical family lawyer. Elias wore a meticulously tailored dark charcoal suit and carried a vintage leather briefcase that looked as though it had destroyed countless corporate empires. He moved with a predatory grace, his sharp gray eyes sweeping over the room before landing on me. Henri, my wealth manager, had described Elias as a legal mercenary. Looking at him now, I understood exactly what he meant. Elias did not offer empty platitudes or fake sympathy. He did not ask how I was feeling or offer congratulations on the birth of my son. He simply sat down beside my bed and opened his briefcase. You requested a war, Elias said, his voice low and incredibly smooth. I am here to review your arsenal, Juliet. Let us begin immediately. I reached for the sleek silver laptop sitting on my tray table and turned the screen toward him. I did not waste his valuable time with emotional complaints. I simply walked him through the digital trap I had constructed during the darkest hours of the night. I showed him the 30 emergency calls logged by the hospital administration desk, tracing them directly to Carter and his active cell phone. I provided the medical charts documenting my catastrophic hemorrhage and the severe fetal distress, proving that Carter had ignored a literal life-or-death medical emergency. I opened the encrypted folder containing the financial and personal records I had pulled from Carter. I showed Elias the hotel confirmations, the massage receipts, and the $4,000 jewelry purchase made at the exact time I was undergoing an emergency cesarean section. Finally, I displayed the high-resolution screenshot of the misdirected text message Carter had sent me. Elias stared at the screen for a long, silent moment. He scrolled through the timeline I had meticulously compiled, matching the financial transactions to the ignored hospital calls. I watched a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It was a look of pure predatory anticipation. In my 20 years of practice, I have never had a client do the heavy lifting for me with such absolute perfection. Elias murmured, his eyes still fixed on the screen. Your husband is not just unfaithful, Juliet. He is criminally negligent and remarkably stupid. You have handed me a fully loaded weapon. Now tell me exactly where you want to aim it. I looked over at the bassinet where my newborn son was sleeping peacefully. I want total control, I told Elias, keeping my voice perfectly level. Carter is a narcissist who views other people as props for his ego. He will try to use my son as a public relations tool to impress his investors. He will want to project the image of a devoted family man. I will not allow my child to be used as a marketing strategy. I want him stripped of all parental rights immediately. Elias nodded, leaning back in his chair. Standard divorce proceedings take time, he explained. Custody battles can drag out for months while lawyers argue over visitation schedules. But we are not going to file a standard divorce petition. We are going to file an emergency ex parte motion for sole physical and legal custody combined with a strict protective order. He leaned forward, his sharp eyes locking onto mine. We are going to argue extreme medical abandonment and reckless endangerment. Elias continued. Your husband left a pregnant woman in active high-risk labor to drive herself to the emergency room so he could go sleep with another woman. He subsequently ignored dozens of urgent communications from medical professionals while you and the child were dying on an operating table. We will present this to the judge, not just as infidelity, but as a severe psychological detachment that makes him an active danger to the welfare of a fragile newborn. Can a judge really suspend his parental rights that quickly? I asked, wanting to be absolutely certain of the legal ground we were standing on. When the evidence is this pristine and the negligence is this severe, judges do not hesitate, Elias assured me. I know the presiding family court judge on duty today. She has zero tolerance for men who endanger children to serve their own selfish interests. By the time I am finished presenting this timeline, your husband will not be legally allowed to come within 500 feet of you or your son. Elias pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase. He had his paralegals drafting the preliminary paperwork the moment Henri had retained him the night before. He handed me a sleek black pen and directed me where to sign. I signed my name over and over again, binding my vast hidden resources to the absolute destruction of my marriage. Every stroke of the pen felt like shedding a heavy, suffocating layer of skin. I was no longer the submissive wife trying to fit into a mold that was designed to diminish me. Once the final document was signed, Elias placed the paperwork back into his briefcase. He pulled out his phone, dialing his legal team with rapid precision. He instructed his senior partners to bypass the standard filing clerks and march the emergency petition directly into the judge's private chambers, attaching the hospital logs as primary exhibits. I will be back before noon, Elias promised, looking at me directly. Rest, Juliet. You have won the first battle without firing a single audible shot. The next 4 hours passed in a surreal state of quiet anticipation. The hospital staff rotated through my room, checking my vitals and bringing me breakfast. Every time the door opened, my heart raced, wondering if Carter had realized his mistake. But the room remained peaceful. Carter was likely waking up in Napa Valley, sipping expensive coffee and preparing to lie to his investors. Just before noon, the heavy wooden door to my suite opened once again. Elias walked in, his predatory smile wider than before. He held up a thick manila folder bearing the official raised seal of the California Family Court System, marking our total victory. It is done, Elias announced, setting the folder on my tray table. The judge reviewed the timeline, the medical reports, and the financial negligence. She was thoroughly appalled. She signed the emergency ex parte order granting you immediate 100% physical and legal custody of your son. The protective order is currently active. Carter has no legal right to see the child and no right to approach you. I touched the paper of the court order. A profound wave of relief washed over me, bringing hot tears to my eyes. He was safe. He was legally shielded from the toxic, chaotic whirlwind of his father's narcissism. Carter had traded his family for a cheap night of luxury. Now, before he even packed his bags to leave his boutique resort, he had officially lost his wife and his child forever. "We have secured the fortress," Elias said quietly, watching me process the victory. "Now we must turn our attention to his company." The moment Elias said the word company, I reopened the laptop and pulled the real capitalization table onto the screen. Carter loved showing investors glossy projections and carefully staged growth charts. His startup was not a $40 million technology empire. It was a cash-starved company surviving from one emergency bridge loan to the next. I opened the operating statements and walked Elias through the numbers. Payroll had increased by 40% in 6 months, but revenue had barely moved. Carter had signed an expensive downtown office lease to impress investors, even though half the engineering team worked remotely. He had leased luxury cars through a marketing subsidiary classified private dinners as client development and repeatedly transferred corporate cash into accounts labeled founder reimbursement. The company had less than 5 weeks of unrestricted cash remaining. Elias studied the screen without interrupting. "How much of this is secured debt enough to control him?" I replied. 3 years earlier, when Carter could not persuade a bank to extend a conventional credit line, I had helped him organize a series of convertible bridge notes. The notes gave lenders the right to convert unpaid principal into preferred shares if the company missed certain financial covenants. Carter had violated nearly every covenant. He had exceeded the approved spending limit, failed to maintain the required cash reserve, and used restricted corporate funds for personal expenses. He had also pledged a significant portion of his founder shares as collateral. Carter never read the documents carefully. He had signed wherever I placed a tab, convinced that paperwork was beneath a visionary like him. I had read every line. I called Henri through the encrypted application and placed the phone on speaker. He had assembled Vanguard's acquisition team in Geneva, New York, and San Francisco. Debt specialists and lawyers were waiting in 3 time zones. "Begin with the bridge notes," I instructed. "Use a newly formed Vanguard subsidiary. Carter cannot see my name anywhere in the acquisition chain." Henri confirmed that the vehicle had already been incorporated under a neutral holding company name. The trust would provide the capital, but the public filings would reveal only a professional investment entity represented by outside counsel. There would be no connection to me until I chose to disclose it. The first lender held $8 million in senior secured notes. Carter had been begging that fund for a 90-day extension, but its investment committee had already classified the position as distressed. Vanguard offered to purchase the notes at 96 cents on the dollar cash. The second lender was the family office that had invested because Carter promised a national product launch by the end of the year. Its managing director became alarmed when Henri's team presented the company's actual burn rate and the documented misuse of restricted credit. Vanguard offered full repayment of principal plus accrued interest in exchange for assignment of the note, its conversion rights, and its board observer seat. The agreement was signed before noon. With those 2 transactions, the trust controlled the company's most dangerous debt. If the notes were accelerated, Carter would lose the collateralized portion of his founder equity. If they were converted, Vanguard would become one of the largest shareholders overnight. I intended to protect the employees and remove the man using their work as fuel for his vanity. "Now the early investors," I said. Henri's team contacted the seed shareholders one by one under strict non-disclosure agreements. Most of them had been waiting months for credible financial reporting. Carter had avoided their calls, delayed board packets, and replaced audited figures with optimistic slide decks. Vanguard offered them a clean exit at a modest premium to their original investment. In return, they would transfer their common and preferred shares, assign their voting proxies, and sign written consents supporting an emergency board meeting. The first investor accepted because his fund was closing and needed liquidity. The second had already lost confidence in Carter after 2 senior engineers resigned. A third hesitated until Elias authorized the controlled disclosure of the corporate card records. We did not reveal Veronica's identity. We showed only that company money had been used for luxury lodging, jewelry, and personal entertainment during a period when employees had been warned that payroll might be delayed. That investor signed immediately. By early afternoon, the numbers on the capitalization table began changing. 12%, 23, 38. Every transfer appeared as another quiet line inside a secure dashboard. Carter was still in Napa, probably congratulating himself over breakfast, while the ownership beneath his feet moved steadily into my hands. The final block belonged to a retired software executive who had been one of Carter's earliest supporters. He did not want to sell because he believed in the product and worried that an unknown buyer would dismantle the company. I spoke to him directly without revealing my personal relationship to Carter. "I am not acquiring this business to liquidate it," I told him. "I am acquiring it to protect the employees, preserve the technology, and install responsible governance. The current chief executive has concealed material financial information and violated the restrictions on company funds. If he remains in control, the business will fail." The executive requested proof. Elias sent him a limited evidence package through a secure data room: the missed covenants, the false reimbursement entries, the resort charges, and the board reports. Carter had altered before circulation. 20 minutes later, the executive agreed to sell half his position and grant Vanguard an irrevocable proxy over the remainder until the emergency meeting. The control calculation crossed 51% at 3:17 in the afternoon. I stared at the figure on the screen. Vanguard now controlled a majority of the outstanding voting power. The trust also owned the senior debt, the conversion rights, and enough written consents to replace the board chair. Carter still possessed shares on paper, but he no longer controlled the board, the financing, or the company bank accounts. His authority existed only because no one had told him it was gone. Henri forwarded the final acquisition packet. It included the debt assignments, stock purchase agreements, voting proxies, and a draft board resolution suspending Carter for misuse of corporate assets and breach of fiduciary duty. The resolution appointed an interim operating committee, preserved employee payroll, froze founder reimbursements, and ordered a complete independent audit. Elias read the resolution and gave a nod. "Once the final signatures are countersigned tomorrow morning, the board can remove him without warning. Make the meeting effective at 8 o'clock, I said. "Do not announce the controlling shareholder until every document is irrevocable." Henri confirmed the instruction. His team would complete the last transfers overnight, circulate unanimous written consents at dawn, and place the company's banking authority under dual control. Carter would walk into the hospital, believing Harrison's $10 million check was the key to his future. In reality, Harrison's leverage had already been purchased, Carter's debt had a new owner, and the votes required to fire him were sitting inside my encrypted account. I closed the capitalization table and looked toward my sleeping son. Carter had called me a glorified calculator because he believed numbers were passive things. He had never understood that numbers were ownership, leverage, evidence, and power. While he slept beside another man's wife, I had followed every number he ignored until they formed a chain around his company. The corporate trap was now locked. All that remained was to remove my son and myself from every physical space Carter still believed he controlled. I closed the acquisition dashboard and turned back to Elias. The company was no longer an uncertainty. It was a controlled operation nearing final execution. Carter still believed he owned our suburban house. I needed to remove that illusion before he returned from Napa. The financial fortress would protect our future, but first I had to extract my son, my records, and every part of our life from the spaces Carter believed belonged to him. Elias gave a sharp nod, handing me a business card for a premium private relocation service that specialized in discreet extractions. I waited until Elias left the hospital room to make the call. The woman who answered the phone was incredibly efficient. She assured me her team was capable of executing a completely sterile extraction within hours. I authorized a massive premium payment from my trust account to secure their absolute priority and silence. Because I was still recovering from the surgery, I could not be at the suburban house to supervise the move in person. I provided the relocation coordinator with the temporary access codes to the smart locks on the front door and gave her explicit instructions. I wanted every trace of my existence completely scrubbed from that property. Over the next 6 hours, I sat in my hospital bed holding my sleeping son and watched the operation unfold in real time through the live feeds of the interior security cameras. Carter had installed top-of-the-line surveillance systems when we first moved in, wanting to monitor the expensive packages he ordered. What he forgot was that I had set up the network. I held the master administrative privileges. Before the moving team arrived, I logged into the security portal, changed all passwords, and permanently revoked his access to the system. The cameras now belonged exclusively to me. I was going to capture his exact reaction when he finally returned to the empty house. Through the high-definition video feed on my laptop, I watched as a team of 12 professional movers descended upon the suburban home, moving with military precision. First, they tackled my home office, packing up every ledger, financial document, and file folder I had ever touched. They removed my desk, my computer monitors, and the ergonomic chair I had spent thousands of hours sitting in while auditing his sloppy accounts. Within 45 minutes, the room was reduced to bare walls and empty carpet. Next, they moved to the master bedroom. I watched them empty my side of the massive walk-in closet, packing my clothes, shoes, jewelry, and personal safe. They stripped the bed, taking the expensive silk sheets and the duvet ruined when my water broke. They scrubbed the hardwood floors until there was no trace of the terrifying medical emergency that had occurred just a few nights prior. They left his designer suits hanging untouched on his side of the closet, but my side was rendered completely bare. The most emotional part of the extraction was watching them dismantle the nursery. Carter and I had spent weeks preparing that room. We had painted the walls a soft, calming gray and assembled the expensive crib he had insisted on buying for the aesthetic appeal. I felt a fierce protective satisfaction as the movers carefully wrapped the rocking chair, the changing table, and every tiny piece of baby clothing I had washed and folded. They packed the pristine, unused crib and carried it out the front door. They boxed up the stuffed animals, the storybooks, and the delicate mobile hanging from the ceiling. When they were finished, the room was nothing more than an empty, echoing space. There was absolutely no evidence that a child had ever been expected to live there. By late afternoon, the extraction was completely finished. The relocation team had wiped down the counters, vacuumed the floors, and ensured that not a single stray item remained behind. The house was now perfectly sterile. It looked exactly like a staged model home waiting for a buyer. There were no photographs of us on the mantel. There were no coats hanging in the mudroom. My favorite coffee mug was missing from the kitchen shelf. My toothbrush was gone from the master bathroom vanity. Carter would return to a pristine, immaculate void. He had always treated me like an invisible background character, and now I had literally vanished into thin air. While the movers were scrubbing the suburban house, my wealth manager, Henri, was finalizing the arrangements for my new residence. I was not going to hide in a modest rental apartment or stay in an anonymous hotel suite. I instructed Henri to secure a property that reflected the true magnitude of my actual wealth and provided the highest possible level of security for my newborn son. Within hours, Henri sent me the electronic deeds and access codes to an ultra-luxury penthouse located in the very heart of downtown San Francisco. The property occupied the entire top floor of a newly constructed high-rise building. It featured private elevator access, floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass windows, and a dedicated 24-hour security team stationed in the lobby. The building was a fortress designed exclusively for billionaires and foreign dignitaries. Carter, with his failing startup and massive bridge loans, could never dream of accessing a building with this level of elite security. Even if he somehow managed to discover my location, he would never be able to make it past the front desk. The penthouse was ready, but I was not. Dr. Ramirez reviewed my latest blood work and refused to authorize my discharge. The hemorrhage had left me dangerously depleted, and the incision required another several days of monitored recovery. I accepted her decision without argument. Remaining inside the private medical center gave Elias time to complete the custody filings and allowed my son to stay under neonatal observation while the corporate acquisition closed. Henri arranged for the nursery furniture and my personal belongings to be unpacked downtown without me. Through a secure video call, I watched the relocation coordinator place the crib beside the windows, stack the storybooks on the shelves, and lock my financial records inside the penthouse office. A neonatal nurse inspected the room, the building security director changed every elevator credential, and the private chef stocked the kitchen for my recovery. Our new home would be waiting when the doctors released us. Meanwhile, Elias reserved the entire VIP maternity corridor in the name of a Vanguard subsidiary. Two private security officers controlled the entrance, and the hospital blocked all inquiries about my room, my son, and my discharge schedule. The baby remained in a secured nursery at the opposite end of the restricted floor, accessible only to medical staff and people approved by me. Carter could not reach him by charm intimidation or a public relations camera. I sat beside the window holding my sleeping son and watched the city lights brighten as evening settled over San Francisco. The suburban house was empty. The penthouse was prepared. The court order was active. The takeover documents were moving toward final execution. I had not escaped to hide. I had repositioned every vulnerable piece beyond Carter's reach, while leaving one carefully controlled door open for him to enter. When he finally appeared, he would walk into a room where every witness, document, and security measure belonged to me. For the first time, waiting no longer felt helpless. It felt like strategic control. My phone began vibrating against the tray table. I expected Elias or Henri. Instead, the screen displayed Penelope's name. Carter's younger sister had not called once during my pregnancy, unless she wanted money access or a favor. She had not asked whether the baby had arrived. She had not asked why the family group chat had gone silent. Her first message contained a screenshot of her newest social media post, a heavily edited photograph of herself standing beside a rented sports car. "Why haven't you liked this yet?" A second message appeared before I could set the phone down. "I need engagement before the event planner checks my page." Then came the real purpose of the conversation. "Also, the deposit for my birthday venue is due tonight. It is only $18,000. Carter said his money is tied up in the company, so use the household account and handle it. I already told everyone the party is confirmed." I stared at the words without surprise. Penelope was turning 30 and had planned a gala built around the idea that she was a luxury lifestyle influencer. She wanted a rooftop ballroom, imported flowers, a celebrity disc jockey, and a champagne wall with her initials carved into the glass. For months, she had treated me as the unpaid administrator responsible for transforming her fantasies into paid invoices. Another message arrived. "Do not make this awkward, Juliet. Mom says you have been emotional lately. Carter needs to focus on real financial matters, and this is the kind of small family task you are good at." I glanced toward my son sleeping peacefully in the bassinet. Carter's family still believed the old system was operating. Beatrice issued commands. Penelope generated expenses. Carter played the visionary, and I quietly made the numbers work. None of them understood that the accounts they relied upon were already being frozen, transferred, or placed under independent review. I typed one sentence. "You should ask Carter about his finances. Things are about to get very tight." The typing indicator appeared immediately. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Then just pay the deposit." "Then Juliet." "I am serious." I did not respond. I forwarded the messages to Elias, because Penelope's demands showed that Carter had been using household and company funds to support his family's personal expenses. Elias added them to the financial misconduct file and instructed the bank to block any unusual transfer request connected to the gala. Penelope tried calling 6 times after I stopped responding. She left a voice message accusing me of sabotaging her birthday and warning that Beatrice would make me regret embarrassing the family. Her outrage was useful. It confirmed that Carter routinely paid her personal expenses and that she expected me to move money without authorization. I saved the recording, exported the metadata, and sent everything to Elias. He replied that the household operating account had been funded through improper transfers from Carter's startup. Until the forensic audit separated marital funds from corporate money, all discretionary payments would remain frozen. Penelope's venue deposit would not be paid. Neither would the florist, the disc jockey, or the designer who had agreed to lend her 3 dresses. I imagined her staring at a declined payment screen, encountering a boundary she could not bully into, disappearing. I felt no triumph over a cancelled party. I felt relief that the machinery of exploitation had completely stopped. An hour later, another name appeared on my screen. Sarah Klein, the private investigator Elias had retained that morning, sent a secure message requesting permission to upload her field report. After I identified Veronica through the burner phone records, Elias had insisted on independent verification. Digital evidence was powerful, but he wanted photographs, witness observations, and a documented chain of custody that Carter could not dismiss as something created by an angry spouse. Sarah had reached Napa before noon. She confirmed that Carter and Veronica had shared room 402, attended the private tasting together, and left the resort wearing matching robes after their couple's massage. She photographed them embracing outside the jewelry boutique and obtained a copy of the purchase receipt through lawful investigative channels. The images were humiliating, but I viewed them as evidence rather than wounds. Sarah's report established the time, location, and identity of both participants. The timestamps matched the corporate card transactions and the hospital's unanswered calls. I authorized her to transmit the complete file directly to Elias and store a sealed duplicate with Vanguard's litigation team. By the fourth day after the birth, every major piece of the operation was in place. The custody order protected my son. The corporate transfers were awaiting final countersignatures. The suburban house had been erased of our presence. The penthouse was ready. Sarah's evidence package was complete. Only Carter remained unaware. He did not call that day. He did not call the next morning either. 5 days after I had nearly died delivering his child, my phone finally lit up with his name. For one brief second, I wondered whether some fragment of conscience had survived inside him. Perhaps he had listened to the hospital messages. Perhaps he had learned that I had undergone emergency surgery and wanted to know whether his son was alive. The message contained no apology and no question. Heading to the hospital now with Harrison and the PR team. Have the kid dressed in that blue outfit. Do not look exhausted in the photos. I read it twice not because it surprised me, but because it reduced our entire marriage to one perfect piece of evidence. Carter had ignored 30 emergency calls, spent days with his mistress, and now planned to appear when a photographer could document his performance as a devoted father. He did not even use our son's name. He called him the kid. A second message followed. We have a tight schedule. Harrison has a flight, so do not start an argument in front of him. I forwarded both messages to Elias. He called immediately. Do you want security to stop them in the lobby? No, I said. Let Carter enter the suite before he is formally served. Harrison needs to witness the truth and Carter needs to say exactly what he believes, while the photographer and security cameras are recording. Elias agreed, but only under strict conditions. 2 officers would remain outside the doors. He would wait in the adjoining consultation room with the signed order and a certified process server. My son would be moved to the secured nursery at the opposite end of the restricted corridor, guarded by a neonatal nurse and a security officer. Carter would never come within 500 feet of him. The moment the order was served, any refusal to leave would be documented and enforced. The nurses removed the bassinet flowers blankets and every visible baby item from my suite. Staff converted the room into a calm, private sitting area. I changed into an emerald silk lounge suit Henri had delivered, and a stylist helped arrange my hair, so I looked composed without concealing the reality of my recovery. The leather folder containing the affair evidence rested beside my teacup. The corporate acquisition documents remained sealed beneath it. At 1:47 in the afternoon, Carter sent his final message. Parking now. Be ready. I looked at the empty room, the closed consultation door behind which Elias waited, and the camera indicator glowing discreetly above the entrance. Then I typed the only response he deserved. We are waiting. The waiting ended at precisely 2 o'clock on the 5th afternoon after my son's birth. Carter's message had arrived 13 minutes earlier, and the guards confirmed that 4 visitors were approaching the restricted corridor. Elias and the process server moved into the consultation room. The neonatal nurse carried my son to the secured nursery and locked the access door behind her. I settled into the high-backed chair beside the glass table, placed one hand near the leather folder, and listened as Carter's footsteps drew closer. He still believed he was arriving to direct a photograph. The door handle turned. Carter pushed the heavy door open, stepping into the massive sunlit suite with the swagger of a man who believed he owned the entire world. He was dressed immaculately in a custom-tailored navy suit, his hair perfectly styled, his jawline sharp and relaxed. He flashed a brilliant practice smile meant entirely for the cameras. Right behind him walked Beatrice wearing an aggressively expensive cream pantsuit and clutching a designer handbag like a weapon. Flanking them was Harrison, the billionaire lead investor. Carter was so desperate to impress, and a young photographer holding a massive professional camera. My husband did not ask how I was feeling. He did not rush to the bassinet to see the son he had abandoned during a life-threatening medical emergency. Instead, he struck a pose in the center of the room, angling his body so the natural light from the floor to ceiling windows hit his face perfectly. The photographer immediately began snapping pictures, the rapid clicking sound filling the quiet suite. Carter looked around the room, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second, when he realized I was not lying in bed, looking exhausted and compliant. I was sitting in a high-backed leather armchair near the window, fully dressed in a tailored silk blouse and matching trousers. My hair was professionally blown out, my makeup flawless, and my posture radiating absolute authority. I did not look like the plain, boring suburban bookkeeper he had left behind. I looked exactly like the majority shareholder of a financial empire. Carter blinked, clearly thrown off balance by my appearance, but his desperate need to secure the investment forced him to maintain his carefully curated facade. He walked toward me, arms outstretched for a forced embrace. "Juliet, darling," Carter said, his voice dripping with fake affection that made my stomach turn. "I am so glad to finally be here. The investor retreat was absolutely crucial for our future, but my heart was here with you the entire time. Where is our little man? I need a picture of the three of us together for the feature article." He reached for my arm, but I stood up smoothly, stepping out of his reach. The photographer lowered his camera, sensing the sudden icy drop in the room temperature. Beatrice huffed loudly, stepping forward to intervene. "Do not be difficult," Beatrice snapped, abandoning the warm grandmother routine immediately. "Carter took time out of his incredibly busy schedule to come here. Harrison has a flight to catch in 2 hours. Just get the baby and smile for the camera so we can wrap up this public relations requirement. You owe him that much after disrupting his weekend with your constant unnecessary phone calls." Harrison stood near the door, his hands tucked into his pockets, watching the exchange with a sharp, calculating gaze. He was a seasoned businessman who had built his fortune reading people, and I could tell he was already picking up on the toxic dynamic between my husband and me. Carter shot his mother a warning look, desperately trying to keep the situation under control. "Mom, please," Carter muttered, turning back to me with a tight, strained smile. "Juliet is just tired from the delivery." "Right, honey. Let us just get a few quick shots with the baby. The photographer needs the family man angle before we close the seed funding round. It will take 5 minutes, and then you can go back to resting." I looked at the man I had spent 7 years serving. He was completely hollow, a shiny, empty shell of a human being who viewed his wife and newborn child as nothing more than convenient marketing props. He had spent his weekend sleeping with another woman while I bled on an operating table, and now he wanted me to smile and pretend we were the perfect American family to secure $10 million. "There will be no photographs today, Carter," I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of emotion. "And there will certainly be no family man angle for your public relations campaign." Carter stared at me, his handsome face twisting into an ugly scowl. He lowered his voice, taking a threatening step closer. "Stop throwing a tantrum in front of Harrison," he hissed through gritted teeth. "I am not playing games with you today, Juliet. Where is my son? Get him right now and pose for the picture, or I swear to God you will regret it." I did not answer. For 7 years, Carter had depended on my explanations, apologies, and attempts to repair what he broke. Now I watched him stand in the suite with his hand extended toward the child he had treated like a prop. The photographer lowered his camera as he studied the room. There was no bassinet, no balloon arrangement, no newborn blanket, and no blue outfit. The suite held only a seating area, a glass table, the leather folder beside my tea, and a discreet security camera above the door. Carter followed the photographer's gaze. His confidence flickered, but he recovered quickly and turned the confusion into irritation. "What did you do with the setup?" he demanded. My assistant confirmed the flowers. The brand consultant sent over the clothing. "Where is everything?" I lifted my cup and took a measured sip. Beatrice rushed to fill the silence. "The room looks disgracefully empty," she announced, as if reviewing a poorly decorated charity luncheon. "This is exactly what happens when Juliet is allowed to make decisions without supervision." Carter, I told you we should have hired someone to manage the delivery." Harrison's head turned toward her. The movement was small, but I saw the disbelief in his expression. He had entered expecting a polished family photograph. Instead, he was hearing a grandmother describe a dangerous birth as a scheduling problem. Carter shot his mother a warning glance. "Not now." "It is absolutely now," Beatrice replied. "You brought Harrison here to see stability. He needs to understand that any disorder is Juliet's fault, not yours." Carter came closer to me. "Listen carefully," he said under his breath. "You are going to stop this performance. We will take 3 photographs, one with the baby, one of me holding him, and one of the 3 of us together. Then Harrison and I will leave for the office. You can complain after the deal closes." I looked at him without speaking. His jaw tightened. "Did you hear me?" I set the cup down, but I still gave him no answer. The refusal unsettled him more than shouting. Arguments gave Carter material to twist. Silence gave him nothing, and every second made him look less like a visionary and more like a husband who did not know where his newborn child was. He forced another camera-ready smile. "Juliet has had a difficult recovery," he told Harrison. "The medication has made her emotional. She is usually much more cooperative." Harrison did not smile back. "You said the delivery was routine." It was. Carter answered too quickly. Beatrice walked toward the closed consultation room door and reached for the handle. One of the private guards outside shifted visible through the narrow glass panel. I spoke for the first time. "Do not open that door." Beatrice stopped and turned slowly. "You do not give me orders. In this room I do." The certainty in my voice made her hesitate. She looked toward Carter, expecting him to restore the hierarchy. He stepped forward. "My mother can go wherever she wants. This hospital stay is being paid through my insurance." His policy had covered the emergency treatment, but Vanguard was paying for the private wing and security. I did not correct him. The truth would arrive in a more useful order. Carter tried the door himself. It did not move. Elias had locked it from inside, ensuring that no one entered until the moment of formal service. "What is in there?" Carter asked. "Nothing that belongs to you." His face darkened. "Stop talking like that." "Like what?" "Like you have authority. You came here 5 days after your son was born, brought an investor and a photographer, and ordered a woman recovering from surgery to improve your public image. Authority is not the strangest thing being demonstrated here." "5 days?" Harrison asked. Carter turned sharply. "The retreat ran longer than expected." "The retreat you described as a 1-day strategy session." Carter's mouth opened, but Beatrice interrupted before he could invent a better answer. "Harrison, please do not encourage her," she said. Juliet has always been jealous of Carter's professional obligations. She knew he had a critical funding discussion. Women have delivered children without turning it into a crisis for thousands of years. My voice remained even. "I drove myself here while hemorrhaging." Harrison unfolded his arms. "You drove yourself." Carter moved between us. "She is exaggerating. Juliet exaggerates when she wants attention." I looked past him at Harrison. The hospital entrance cameras recorded my arrival. The medical chart records a placental abruption, fetal distress, emergency surgery, multiple transfusions, and 14 hours of critical treatment. Carter's eyes flashed with panic because Harrison had heard the facts. He leaned closer. "Why are you doing this in front of him? Because you brought him." "That was for the photographs." "Yes." The single word exposed him more cleanly than any accusation. Harrison glanced toward the photographer, then back at Carter. "Did you know she was in surgery?" "I was in meetings." "That was not my question." Carter rubbed the back of his neck. My phone was on silent. Beatrice stepped beside him. A founder cannot be expected to interrupt a $10 million negotiation every time his wife becomes anxious. Carter saw the damage spreading and changed tactics. He softened his tone and crouched beside my chair as though offering intimacy for the camera. "Juliet, enough," he whispered. "I am sorry you had a frightening experience. We can discuss it privately. Right now, I need you to help me protect the company. Hundreds of employees are depending on this round. There were 43 employees and I had already protected their payroll. Carter was using them as he intended to use our son. I am not responsible for protecting you from what you did," I said. His expression hardened again. "This is not about me. It is about our future. Our future ended at 2:30 in the morning." He stood abruptly. "You do not get to decide that alone. I already did." Beatrice made an offended sound. Carter stopped negotiating with her. "She has always responded to consequences. Tell her you will cancel her credit cards. Tell her she will lose the house. Once she understands she has nowhere else to go, she will behave rationally." Harrison looked from Beatrice to me, noticing the silk suit, the private security, the lawyer's folder, and the absence of fear in my face. He straightened his jacket. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "Juliet manages bookkeeping for the household, and sometimes helps with company accounts. She has no independent resources. She is upset, but she will calm down." I leaned back in the chair. "You seem very certain." "I know my wife." "No, Carter. You know the role you assigned me." The photographer shifted again. His camera strap struck the edge of a chair with a soft tap. Carter spun toward him. "Why are you not shooting?" "There is no baby in the room," the young man said. "Then photograph us until they bring him." "I was hired for a newborn family feature. You were hired to do what I tell you." Harrison finally stepped away from the door. "He was hired by your company." Carter hesitated. Beatrice answered for him. "Of course. This profile benefits the brand." Harrison's gaze sharpened. "So corporate funds are paying for this photographer. It is a legitimate marketing expense," Carter said. I said nothing. He had offered another piece of evidence himself. Carter walked to the bathroom, pushed the door open, and looked inside. He checked behind the privacy screen, then crossed to the built-in cabinets and opened them one after another. Each shelf was empty. His movements became faster and less controlled. "Did the nurses move him?" he asked. I remained silent. He pressed the call button beside the bed. Nothing happened because the nursing station had been instructed to route all non-medical requests through security during the confrontation. He pressed it again. "Where is the staff protecting their patients?" I said. "I am the father." I held his gaze. Beatrice marched to the hallway doors and pulled them open. The two private officers immediately stepped forward, blocking her path without touching her. "I want the head nurse," she demanded. "One has been notified," an officer replied. "Please remain inside unless Ms. Juliet asks you to leave." Beatrice recoiled. Ms. Juliet Carter came to the doorway. "Who hired you?" The officer did not answer. He simply looked toward me for instruction. That small movement changed the room. Harrison saw it. The photographer saw it. Beatrice saw it. Carter saw it last. He slowly closed the doors and studied my clothes, the leather folder, the private suite, and the guards who treated me as the only person whose permission mattered. His mind finally tested a possibility. His ego had rejected my silence, concealed resources and authority he knew nothing about. "What have you done?" he asked. I lifted my cup again. "You came for a photograph." His nostrils flared. "I came for my son." "No. You came with a photographer." Carter began pacing again. "This is kidnapping. You cannot hide my child from me." Beatrice seized the accusation. "Exactly. We should call the police. Tell them she is unstable after surgery and has taken the baby somewhere without the father's permission." The camera above the door recorded every word. I looked at Beatrice. "Please say that again." She stopped. Carter pointed toward the consultation room. "Is he in there?" I did not answer. He crossed the suite and struck the locked door with the flat of his hand. "Open this." The door remained closed. He hit it again. "Bring him out." One guard opened the outer door. "Sir, lower your voice and step away from the interior door." Carter spun around. Do you know who I am? Yes, the guard said. Carter's control finally began to fracture. He turned toward Harrison, desperate to reclaim the business performance that had brought him there. This is what I deal with, he said, gesturing toward me. She creates chaos before important events, then forces me to clean it up. Once the funding closes, I will hire full-time help and make sure this never affects the company again. Harrison's expression remained cold. Your wife almost died. She survived. The words escaped before Carter could stop them. The photographer stared. Beatrice recognized the mistake, and Harrison looked at Carter as if seeing him clearly for the first time. I placed my cup on the saucer. Carter heard the soft clink and turned back toward me. Enough, he said. You have made your point. Now end this. I waited. His voice rose. Where did you put him? I said nothing. He searched the room again as if a newborn might appear if he became angry enough. The polished founder vanished, replaced by the entitled man I had seen at 2:30 in the morning. He pointed at me. Where is he? Carter demanded. Where is my son? Bring him out. We have a tight schedule. I did not flinch. I did not rush to obey his commanding tone. I simply sat in my high-backed designer chair and watched him unravel. I slowly raised my delicate porcelain teacup and looked at him over the rim, savoring the fragrant steam rising from the hot artisan tea. The silence in the room became incredibly heavy, pressing down on everyone except me. The hired public relations photographer shifted uncomfortably, sensing that he had walked into a catastrophic legal nightmare. Harrison, the billionaire lead investor, narrowed his sharp eyes, analyzing the shifting power dynamic with ruthless corporate precision. He was watching a supposed visionary tech founder completely lose control of his own life. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. My smile was completely devoid of warmth, freezing the entire room in its tracks. What baby? I asked softly. Carter froze mid-step. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his handsome face twisting into a mask of pure, bewildered rage. He opened his mouth to scream, but Beatrice beat him to it. She marched forward, her expensive cream pantsuit rustling aggressively. She slammed her hands down on the back of the empty chair next to me, leaning forward with a toxic sneer. Stop being difficult, Juliet. Beatrice snapped, her shrill voice vibrating with absolute contempt. Bring out my grandson. I carefully placed the porcelain teacup back onto its saucer. The soft clink of the fine china sounded like a judge bringing down a final gavel. I looked directly into Beatrice's furious eyes, meeting her toxic entitlement with an impenetrable wall of ice. I am not being difficult, Beatrice, I replied. I delivered a child alone while my husband chose a resort room. What happens next is not controlled by you or Carter. I tapped the manila envelope. The consultation room door opened, and Elias entered with a certified process server. Carter stopped moving as Elias placed the official packet into his hands. You have been formally served, Elias said. This emergency California family court order grants Juliet temporary sole custody pending a full hearing. It suspends your access to the child and requires all contact to go through counsel. It is effective immediately. Carter stared at the raised seal. This is impossible. It is enforceable, Elias replied. Security has a copy, so does the hospital. Carter tore his gaze from the papers and looked at me. You cannot take my son. I am his father. You left me bleeding on the floor and told me to find my own transportation, I said. Then you ignored 30 calls while both of us were critical. A judge reviewed the records and determined that access posed an immediate risk pending a full hearing. Beatrice reached for the page, but the process server blocked her. This is some temporary trick, she said. Once our attorneys explain who Carter is, the judge will reverse it. Elias gave her a calm look. Who Carter is has been documented extensively. Harrison remained silent, studying Carter's face. The photographer had stopped pretending this was a family feature. He lowered the camera while the light above the door continued recording. Carter noticed both details. His gaze moved between the witnesses, and I saw him understand that every threat he made would now survive beyond the room. Carter shook the packet at me. You do not have the money to arrange this. You balance household accounts. You do not know judges, private guards, or attorneys like him. That misunderstanding is not my problem anymore. His eyes moved over my silk suit, Elias, and the officers. He understood that the room had been prepared before he entered. Harrison stepped forward. What evidence supported the order? Elias answered before Carter could interrupt. Documented medical abandonment, reckless endangerment, 30 unanswered, emergency calls, verified hotel records, and financial activity establishing that Mr. Carter was engaged in non-business conduct while representing himself as unavailable because of an investor meeting. Harrison's gaze sharpened. Company money. Yes, I said. The resort spa and jewelry were charged to corporate accounts. Carter's face lost its color. That is a lie, he said quickly. Those were legitimate development expenses. Then the independent audit will be easy for you, Elias replied. Beatrice moved beside her son. Harrison, do not listen to this. Juliet is hormonal, vindictive, and desperate for attention. Carter has spent years supporting her while she contributed nothing but bookkeeping. Harrison did not look at her. Were corporate funds used at the resort? Carter's mouth opened. No answer came. He searched for a version of the truth that could protect him. There was none. Juliet, he said, finally lowering his voice. Tell everyone to leave. We can resolve this privately. I made mistakes, but destroying our family will not help the baby. Our family was not destroyed by a court order, I replied. It was destroyed when you heard me begging for help and put in your earplugs. His face tightened. I did not know it was that serious. I told you something was wrong. I was exhausted. So was I when I drove myself here while hemorrhaging. Beatrice raised both hands. Enough of this melodrama. Carter came to see his child. Bring the baby out for 5 minutes, take the photographs, and discuss the paperwork later. Elias turned toward her. The order does not contain a photography exception. The process server documented the time. A security officer entered and stood near the door. Carter looked from him to Elias and Harrison as his professional image collapsed. He tried another approach. Harrison, this is a domestic dispute. It has nothing to do with the company or our deal. Using company money has everything to do with the company, Harrison said. Carter looked at me. What did you show them? I rested my hand on the closed leather folder. Only what was necessary for the custody order. His eyes fixed on the folder. Give that to me. No. He stepped forward. The officer moved between us. Elias spoke without raising his voice. The order has been served. You are required to leave the suite and direct all further communication through counsel. Carter's fear hardened into anger. He still believed volume and money could restore his authority. I met his stare. Leave now, Carter, I said. If you refuse, security will remove you, and the violation will be added to the court record. The heavy silence that followed my demand seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Carter stood frozen in the center of the pristine hospital suite, his chest heaving as the reality of my words collided violently with his massive ego. For a fraction of a second, I saw genuine disbelief crack the polished facade of the rising tech visionary he pretended to be. He looked at the closed mahogany doors, then at the empty space where he had expected to find a subservient wife and a convenient newborn prop. The sheer audacity of my command to leave the room finally registered in his brain. The terror that had previously widened his eyes rapidly evaporated, replaced by a sudden and explosive narcissistic rage. His face turned a deep mottled shade of crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against the crisp collar of his custom-tailored navy suit. He let out a harsh guttural sound, tossing his expensive sunglasses onto the glass table with a sharp clatter that made his mother flinch. He was completely unaccustomed to being told no, let alone being ordered out of a room by the woman he had spent 7 years treating like invisible furniture. Are you out of your mind? Carter bellowed, his voice echoing off the soundproof walls with terrifying force. He took 2 aggressive steps toward me, his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. You think you can just print out some fake legal documents and dictate terms to me? You think you can kick me out of a hospital room that my insurance is paying for? He let out a manic, condescending laugh, pacing back and forth across the marble floor like a caged animal. You are absolutely delusional, Juliet. You sit there in your fancy little outfit drinking tea and acting like you hold the cards, but you have absolutely nothing. You have no money, no power, and no idea how the real world actually works. I built a technology empire from the ground up while you sat at home balancing grocery budgets. I am the reason you have a roof over your head. I am the reason you are even sitting in this luxury wing. Beatrice stepped forward, emboldened by her son's sudden display of aggression. Tell her, Carter, she urged, her voice shrill and dripping with venom. Show this ungrateful woman exactly who she is dealing with. She has lost her mind from the delivery. She never appreciated anything we did for her. Carter did not even look at his mother, his furious gaze locked entirely on me. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, stepping so close I could smell the stale coffee and mints on his breath. I am going to destroy you in court, he threatened, a cruel, ugly sneer twisting his handsome features. I am going to hire the most ruthless, expensive legal team in the state of California, and I am going to drag you through a custody battle so vicious you will beg me to let you walk away with nothing. I will take my son, I will take the house, and I will make sure you are left working minimum wage retail for the rest of your miserable life. You seriously underestimated who you are messing with today. He paused, taking a deep breath to inflate his chest, desperately trying to project absolute dominance in front of the billionaire investor standing quietly near the door. He turned his body slightly, ensuring Harrison was watching his display of power. Do you see the man standing right over there? Carter demanded, gesturing wildly toward Harrison. That is my lead investor. We are closing a $10 million seed funding round this week. My company is valued at $40 million, and we are about to dominate the market. I have the backing of the most powerful financial minds in the industry. Carter turned back to me, leaning over my chair and slamming his hands down on the armrests, trying to physically intimidate me into submission. I am a millionaire, Juliet. He screamed, his voice vibrating with absolute arrogance and raw contempt. You are a glorified calculator. I will crush you. The echoes of his threat bounced off the sterile hospital walls, leaving a tense, vibrating energy in the air. The hired public relations photographer shrank back against the window, desperately wishing he was anywhere else. Beatrice stood tall, a triumphant smirk resting on her aging face, fully believing her son had just re-established the natural order of their toxic hierarchy. Carter stayed leaned over me, breathing heavily, waiting for the inevitable moment where I would lower my eyes, burst into tears, and apologize for my temporary rebellion. He waited for the plain, boring bookkeeper to shrink back into the shadows and submit to his overwhelming authority. I did not flinch. I did not lean back away from his aggressive posture. I did not blink, and I certainly did not cry. I simply looked up at him, my expression perfectly serene and entirely unfazed by his explosive temper tantrum. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face, freezing the remaining warmth right out of the room. The absolute lack of fear in my eyes made Carter hesitate, his triumphant sneer faltering as he realized his intimidation tactics were failing spectacularly. I slowly reached across the glass side table, my hand moving past the discarded sunglasses and the manila envelope containing the custody orders. My manicured fingers found the edge of a sleek, heavy leather folder I had kept resting beside my teacup since the morning. I pulled it onto my lap, tracing the smooth texture of the expensive leather. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft, deliberate sound of the metal clasp popping open. I flipped the heavy cover back, revealing neatly organized financial documents. Carter slowly stood up straight, taking a tiny, uncertain step backward. His eyes darted from my calm smile to the mysterious leather folder in my lap. He opened his mouth to issue another threat, but his voice died in his throat. I completely ignored my husband, shifting my gaze away from his terrified face. I turned my head and looked directly at Harrison. The billionaire investor had not moved a single muscle during Carter's entire tirade. He stood with his hands casually tucked into his trouser pockets, his sharp, calculating eyes tracking every shifting nuance of the power dynamic playing out in front of him. When my eyes locked onto his, Harrison offered a very slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, recognizing that he was no longer a spectator, but a direct participant in the execution I was orchestrating. Before my husband crushes me, Harrison, I said, my voice smooth, melodic, and carrying perfectly across the silent hospital suite, I think you might want to see how he spent your initial seed money. Carter let out a strangled gasp, all the color instantly draining from his face once again. He lunged his hand forward to grab the leather folder, but I smoothly pulled it back out of his reach. Harrison took a slow, deliberate step away from the wall, his posture suddenly rigid with professional interest. His sharp eyes narrowed, cutting right through Carter's panicked protests. He began walking slowly toward the glass table, completely ignoring the desperate man who was now visibly trembling in absolute sheer terror before my very own eyes. And exactly whose wife he spent it on, I finished. I kept my eyes locked on the billionaire investor as I reached inside the heavy leather folder. My movements were slow, fluid, and completely unbothered by my husband trembling a few feet away. I pulled out a stack of documents I had meticulously organized. On top were the glossy, high-resolution photographs the private investigator had taken over the weekend in Napa Valley. Beneath them were the detailed, itemized hotel receipts billed directly to the corporate credit line Harrison had provided for the startup. Finally, I placed the printed enlarged screenshot of the misdirected text message Carter had sent me by mistake, detailing his intimate plans for the weekend. I placed my manicured hand flat against the stack of papers and smoothly slid them across the sleek glass surface of the table directly toward Harrison. The thick packet stopped right at the edge of the glass, waiting for him. The only sound in the room was the soft friction of paper gliding over glass. But to my husband it must have sounded like the blade of a guillotine dropping. Carter let out a strangled, breathless noise, instinctively stepping forward as if he could somehow intercept the documents, but his legs seemed to turn to lead. Beatrice stood frozen, her aggressive posture faltering as she finally sensed the true, devastating magnitude of the trap I had laid. She looked at her golden boy, then at the papers, completely lost. Harrison did not rush. He was a man accustomed to absolute control, a man who built a fortune by never showing his hand prematurely. He took another deliberate step forward, his polished dress shoes silent on the marble floor. He leaned over the glass table and picked up the stack of documents. He looked at the top photograph first. For a fraction of a second, the room held its collective breath. I watched the exact moment the polished, untouchable billionaire investor died and the deeply betrayed husband was born. The transformation was terrifying to witness. The healthy, confident color completely drained from Harrison's sharp face, leaving him chalky and pale. His sharp eyes widened as his brain processed the undeniable image of his elegant wife, Veronica, wrapped in a tight, intimate embrace with the young tech founder he was preparing to fund. Then the shock evaporated, replaced instantly by a rising tide of pure, unadulterated fury. A deep mottled shade of purple began to creep up from his crisp shirt collar, flooding his neck and cheeks. His jaw locked so tightly I could almost hear his teeth grinding together. He flipped to the next photograph, then the next, his hands beginning to shake with a violent, barely contained rage. He saw the undeniable proof of their affair. He saw the hotel receipts proving Carter had used his company's seed money to finance a luxury suite for another man's wife. He saw the text message outlining a weekend of complete deception. Carter tried to speak. He opened his mouth, but the arrogant swagger he had carried into the hospital wing had vanished entirely, leaving behind a pathetic, sputtering coward. Harrison Carter stammered, his voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch. "Harrison, please, you have to understand those are fake. She is crazy. My wife is a crazy, jealous woman who fabricated all of this to ruin our deal. Please do not look at those." Beatrice finally snapped out of her stupor, her toxic entitlement bubbling back to the surface. She took an aggressive step toward the billionaire, pointing a manicured finger at the documents. "You put those ridiculous papers down right now," she shrieked, completely oblivious to the danger radiating from the man in front of her. "My son is a visionary. You are not going to let a bitter, hormonal housewife sabotage a $40 million valuation with cheap parlor tricks. Hand those over to me immediately." Harrison did not look at Beatrice. He did not acknowledge her shrill demands. He slowly raised his head and locked his deadly, furious gaze entirely on Carter. The silence that followed was suffocating. The hired public relations photographer, who had been desperately trying to blend into the wallpaper, suddenly realized he was trapped in a room with a billionaire about to commit a homicide. He took a terrified step backward, his professional camera bumping loudly against the window pane. That minor sound was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Harrison exploded. The controlled, calculating investor vanished, replaced by a force of pure destructive rage. "Get out!" Harrison roared, his voice booming like thunder, shaking the very foundation of the soundproof suite. He lunged forward, moving with a terrifying speed, and grabbed the young photographer by the collar of his shirt. The photographer yelped in absolute terror as Harrison practically threw him across the room toward the exit. "Get out of this room right now before I smash that camera into 1,000 pieces and sue you into bankruptcy." The photographer did not hesitate. He scrambled frantically for the door handle, ripped the heavy mahogany doors open, and bolted down the marble corridor without looking back. The massive doors slammed shut behind him with a deafening crack, sealing us inside the room. Beatrice gasped, stumbling backward and clutching her chest in genuine fear. Harrison turned slowly back toward my husband. Carter was visibly shaking now, his perfectly styled hair falling into his terrified, tear-filled eyes. "You arrogant, pathetic, worthless piece of trash!" Harrison snarled, closing the distance between them until he was standing inches from Carter's trembling face. "You took my money. You sat in my dining room, drank my wine, pitched me your fake family man garbage, and then you used my own capital to sleep with my wife. I am going to destroy you." Harrison continued, his voice dropping to a lethal, quiet hiss that was somehow more terrifying than his shouting. "I am going to pull every single cent of my funding right this second. I am calling every single venture capital firm, every angel investor, and every bank on the West Coast to ensure you never receive another dime in this industry as long as you live. I will tie your fragile little startup up in so much aggressive litigation that you will be drowning in legal fees for the next decade. I will strip you down to absolutely nothing, Carter. You will be completely bankrupt before the sun goes down today." Carter's knees gave out. He collapsed onto the pristine marble floor, sobbing uncontrollably, begging for a mercy he was never going to receive. Beatrice stood frozen in absolute horror, watching her golden boy's entire universe burn to ash. I remained seated, perfectly serene, watching the destruction unfold just as I had perfectly planned. The pristine marble floor of the hospital suite seemed to absorb the pathetic sounds of my husband weeping. Carter was completely broken, his expensive, tailored suit wrinkling as he curled inward, his manicured hands desperately clutching his knees. A few moments ago, he had been the invincible tech visionary, a man who believed his own fabricated mythology so deeply that he thought he was entirely untouchable. Now, stripped of his arrogant bravado and facing the absolute destruction of his financial lifeline, he was nothing more than a terrified child. He gasped for air, his chest heaving violently as he tried to process the sheer magnitude of Harrison's threat. The billionaire investor stood over him like an executioner, his sharp features carved into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. The heavy silence in the room was punctuated only by Carter's frantic, wet breaths. He slowly raised his head, his perfectly styled hair now a tangled mess, his eyes bloodshot and pleading as he looked up at the man who held his entire future in his hands. "Please," Carter choked out, reaching a trembling hand toward the hem of Harrison's crisp trousers. "You cannot do this. You cannot just walk away from this deal. We are too close." He scrambled to his knees, his polished dress shoes slipping awkwardly against the smooth floor. He wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve, completely abandoning any remaining shred of professional dignity. "Think about the company, Harrison. Think about the board of directors. You have already committed to the seed round. The contracts are in motion. We are preparing to close the Series A round and launch nationally by the end of the fourth quarter. You cannot pull your funding now just because of a personal misunderstanding. The expansion round is going to multiply the company's value. You are a businessman. You know the projections. You know the market share we have captured. You cannot let my crazy, unstable wife ruin a perfectly structured corporate acquisition with her petty jealousy. It makes absolutely zero financial sense for you to destroy the startup when we are literally weeks away from the national product launch." Harrison did not move a single muscle to accommodate my husband's desperate groveling. He simply stared down at the pathetic man kneeling before him, his expression hardening into something even colder and more impenetrable than before. "You still do not understand the reality of your situation, do you, Carter?" Harrison said, his deep voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet rumble that commanded absolute authority. You genuinely believe this is about a simple business transaction. You believe that your inflated projections and your inflated expansion projections somehow excuse the fact that you used my corporate capital to finance a luxury hotel suite so you could sleep with my wife. He took a slow, deliberate step backward, creating a clear physical boundary between himself and the sobbing man on the floor. I do not care about your market share. I do not care about your board of directors. I will personally absorb the loss of my initial seed capital just to ensure that you never walk into a boardroom again. Your company is dead. Beatrice finally broke out of her horrified paralysis. She rushed forward, her expensive heels clicking frantically against the marble, and dropped to her knees beside her golden boy. She wrapped her arms tightly around Carter's trembling shoulders, shooting a venomous, panicked glare at the billionaire investor. "You cannot speak to my son this way," she shrieked, her voice shrill and trembling with desperate maternal fury. "He is a genius. He built that technology empire from nothing. You are making a catastrophic mistake, Harrison. You are letting your personal emotions cloud your financial judgment. Carter is the future of this industry, and if you walk away now, you will be the one losing out." She turned her fierce, toxic gaze toward me, her eyes burning with absolute hatred. "Tell him, Juliet. Tell him he cannot do this. You are his wife. You are supposed to protect him. Tell this man that the company is going public and he has no legal right to pull his capital." I watched the two of them kneeling on the floor, a pathetic portrait of unearned arrogance, finally colliding with reality. I did not raise my voice. I did not show even a flicker of anger or sympathy. I simply reached forward and rested my manicured hand on the sleek leather folder that was still sitting perfectly centered on the glass table. I slowly traced my finger along the metal clasp, the soft sound drawing everyone's immediate attention. Carter stopped babbling. Beatrice held her breath. Harrison turned his sharp gaze back to me, waiting for the final maneuver. I popped the metal clasp open with a deliberate click. The sound echoed loudly in the quiet room. I smoothly flipped the heavy cover open once more, ignoring the photographs of the affair, and carefully pulled out a thick, legally binding corporate document bearing the official seal of the state of California. I placed it flat on the glass surface and slowly slid it forward, pushing it directly toward the edge of the table where Carter could clearly see the bold black text printed across the top page. "He can't pull his funding, Carter," I said softly, my voice perfectly level and calm as I looked directly into his wide, terrified eyes. I watched as his brow furrowed in absolute confusion, his brain desperately trying to find a lifeline in my unexpected statement. For a fraction of a second, he actually thought I was stepping in to save him, to protect his precious initial public offering from Harrison's devastating wrath. A tiny, pathetic glimmer of hope sparked on his pale face, fueled by years of me silently fixing his mistakes. But that fragile hope instantly vanished, completely snuffed out by the cold, predatory smile that slowly spread across my carefully painted lips. Because I already bought it out. I continued enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision as the reality of my long game finally took shape. I did not just secretly acquire the massive corporate debt notes you so carelessly leveraged against your own equity through Vanguard Holdings. I acquired 51% of your company. I own the controlling vote, your senior debt, and the board authority required to remove you. I paused, allowing the absolute finality of those words to completely crush the last remaining remnants of his shattered ego into the pristine marble floor. He choked back a sob, his hands flying up to his mouth, as the complete and total annihilation of his entire identity washed over his completely ruined life. "And as of 800 a.m. this morning, you are fired from your own company." The absolute finality of my words hung in the sterile hospital air, crushing whatever tiny fragment of defiance remained in the room. Carter continued to weep openly on the pristine marble floor, his manicured hands covering his face as his entire meticulously fabricated reality collapsed around him. But my attention was no longer on my ruined husband. I shifted my gaze toward his mother. Beatrice was standing perfectly still, her expensive designer handbag clutched tightly against her chest. I watched the intricate calculations actively turning behind her widened eyes. For 7 years, she had viewed me as nothing more than an inconvenient stepping stone, a plain and uninteresting placeholder, until Carter found someone worthy of their prestigious family name. Now staring at the corporate acquisition documents resting on the glass table, Beatrice was forced to process a deeply uncomfortable truth. The plain, boring bookkeeper she had relentlessly tormented was not just a spectator in her son's downfall. I was the architect of it. I was a multimillionaire, and I held the absolute entirety of her golden boy's financial future firmly in the palm of my hand. The transformation was both terrifying and utterly pathetic to witness. The toxic, arrogant sneer that had permanently etched itself into Beatrice's aging features over the last decade rapidly dissolved. In its place, a sickeningly sweet, entirely manufactured smile bloomed across her face. She smoothed the front of her tailored cream pantsuit and took a slow, deliberate step away from her sobbing son. She literally physically distanced herself from Carter, the exact moment she realized he no longer held any power or value. She walked toward me, her hands outstretched in a gesture of maternal warmth that made my stomach churn with profound disgust. "Juliet, my goodness." Beatrice breathed, her shrill voice dropping an octave to sound soothing and intimate. "You must forgive an old woman for being so blind. We have all been so terribly stressed by the sudden emergency delivery, and I was simply speaking out of a place of panicked maternal concern for my family." She took another step closer, entirely ignoring the presence of the billionaire investor who was watching her rapid pivot with visible revulsion. She clasped her hands together, her eyes shining with fake admiration. "I always knew you were hiding a brilliant mind behind that quiet demeanor. To pull off a corporate acquisition of this absolute magnitude, right under everyone's noses, well, it takes a truly brilliant, wealthy daughter-in-law to secure the family's future like this. Carter has always needed a strong, capable woman to guide his ambitions, and you have just proven that you are exactly the formidable partner he requires." I did not move. I let her cloying, desperate praise wash over me, feeling nothing but a deep, crystalline clarity. She stopped a few feet from my chair, her smile trembling slightly under my cold, unwavering stare. Now Beatrice continued, her voice taking on a pleading, desperately gentle quality. "Let us put all this ugly business behind us where it belongs. We are all adults here. Carter has made some foolish, unforgivable mistakes, but he is still your husband. He is still the father of your child. Please, Juliet, just let me see my grandson. Let me hold him. We can sit down together, just the three of us, and figure out how to manage this new company structure moving forward. We are a family, and families heal together." I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. I smoothed the pristine emerald silk of my lounge suit, standing tall and projecting an authority that commanded the entire room. Beatrice instinctively took a half step backward. "You do not get to use that word," I said, my voice quiet, clinical, and completely devoid of any human warmth. "You do not get to invoke the concept of family, now that you realize I am the one signing the checks." I looked down at her, dissecting her years of calculated cruelty with surgical precision. "For 7 years you made it your personal mission to ensure I knew exactly how little I mattered. Do you remember our wedding day, Beatrice? You cornered me in this bridal suite and told me that my cheap off-the-rack dress perfectly matched my unremarkable pedigree. You smiled while you said it, just like you are smiling right now." Beatrice swallowed hard, her fake smile faltering as her eyes darted nervously toward Harrison, who remained silently anchored near the door, taking in every single word. I did not give her a chance to interrupt or deflect. "When I suffered my first miscarriage, I continued, my voice steady and echoing clearly off the soundproof walls. You did not offer comfort. You took Carter out to an expensive steakhouse and told him that perhaps his body was rejecting defective genetics. When I finally managed to carry this child to term, you treated me like a rented incubator. You complained that my morning sickness was an inconvenience to your social calendar. You demanded I schedule a cesarean section so that my labor would not conflict with your country club charity gala. And when I was bleeding out on an operating table 5 days ago while your son was spending investor capital on his mistress in a luxury resort, you were busy picking out silver frames for a magazine photo shoot you planned to feature my child in without my permission." "Juliet, please." Beatrice stammered, her hands trembling, as the ugly, undeniable truth of her own behavior was laid bare in front of an incredibly powerful financial witness. You are taking all of those moments completely out of context. I only wanted what was best for the family legacy. I wanted Carter to have the perfect foundation to build his empire upon. You wanted a prop, I corrected her sharply, stepping closer until I could smell the expensive floral perfume radiating from her skin. You wanted a shiny little accessory to parade around your wealthy friends to prove that your family legacy was strong and successful. You never saw me as a human being, and you certainly never saw my son as a person. He was just another acquisition to you, another asset to manage and control. But you miscalculated, Beatrice. You raised a hollow, greedy coward who was stupid enough to steal from a billionaire and careless enough to leave the receipts lying around for his accountant wife to find. You taught him that rules do not apply to people with the right last name, and I am the one who finally handed him the bill for that spectacular arrogance. I held her terrified gaze. You wanted a legacy, Beatrice. Enjoy watching your son's name become a cautionary tale in Silicon Valley. 6 months later, the autumn wind swept through the downtown financial district, carrying away the remnants of the life I had dismantled. Time had been kind to my son and me, but merciless to the people who had tried to erase us. Carter was gone from Silicon Valley. After Harrison publicly severed every professional tie and confirmed the misuse of corporate funds, the industry turned on him. Vanguard's new board removed him for breach of fiduciary duty, froze his founder benefits, and installed an experienced operating team. The company survived because its employees and technology were worth saving. Carter's mythology was not. The independent audit triggered civil claims, and the senior notes I acquired consumed most of the founder shares he had pledged as collateral. His assets were liquidated under the personal guarantees he had signed without reading. Within weeks, he had lost his title, voting power, reputation, and access to the offices where people once applauded him. Today, my former husband, who used to wear custom-tailored suits and brag about his company's future valuation, was working a menial entry-level sales job at a paper supply company in a dismal industrial park. He spent his days sitting in a gray cubicle cold, calling in different office managers to peddle printer toner. He lived in a tiny, cramped studio apartment, entirely socially exiled from the tech industry he had once so proudly claimed to rule. There were no more luxury hotel suites, no more diamond necklaces bought with corporate funds, and no more fawning photographers. He was just another desperate salesman trying to meet an impossible quota to keep his basic utilities from being shut off. His family had shared equally in his absolute ruin. Beatrice and Penelope had spent their lives treating Carter like an ATM machine, funding their country club memberships and designer wardrobes on the assumption that his wealth would provide a shield against consequence. Without his stolen corporate capital to fund their toxic lifestyle, they were now drowning in a suffocating ocean of overwhelming debt. The creditors had come calling almost immediately after Carter declared personal bankruptcy. Beatrice was forced to sell the suburban estate she had lorded over her social circle for decades, moving into a modest townhouse that Penelope resented. Their wealthy friends who used to drink their expensive champagne stopped answering their phone calls. In the ruthless world they inhabited, poverty was a highly contagious disease, and Beatrice and Penelope had been entirely quarantined. They spent their days bickering in their cramped living room, blaming each other for a collapse they lacked the intelligence to survive. I stepped out onto the expansive balcony of my downtown penthouse, the cool evening air kissing my skin. I took a deep cleansing breath, letting the clean scent of the high-altitude breeze fill my lungs. Below me, the sprawling city skyline glittered like a sea of scattered diamonds, a breathtaking tapestry of light and endless possibility. I was no longer the plain, invisible bookkeeper cowering in the shadows of a sterile suburban house. I was the majority shareholder of Vanguard Holdings, a woman who had meticulously reclaimed her stolen power, her vast wealth, and her sovereign life. I looked down at the beautiful, thriving little boy resting peacefully against my chest. My son was 6 months old now, perfectly healthy and growing stronger with every passing day. He was wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket, his tiny hands curled into delicate fists, completely safe from the toxic legacy his father had tried to force upon him. He would never know the sting of Beatrice's conditional affection or the crushing weight of Carter's narcissistic expectations. He would grow up surrounded by honesty, integrity, and genuine unconditional love. I gently kissed the top of his head, breathing in the sweet, innocent scent of his soft hair. He let out a soft, contented sigh in his sleep, grounding me in the beautiful sanctuary I had successfully built. The sound of warm laughter drifted out through the open sliding glass doors behind me. I turned my head slightly, looking back into the spacious living room of my penthouse. A warm fire crackled merrily in the large marble fireplace, casting a soft glow across the elegant modern furniture. The room was filled with my chosen family, a loyal circle of friends who truly valued me. Elias, my lead attorney and trusted confidant, stood near the kitchen island, pouring sparkling cider and telling a funny story that had everyone smiling. He had been instrumental in executing the Vanguard corporate takeover, standing by my side through the complex legal maneuvering. Beside him stood Sarah, the private investigator, who had uncovered the Napa Valley hotel receipts, now a close personal friend. They were honest people who understood the value of loyalty. Elias caught my eye through the glass and stepped out onto the balcony holding a sleek tablet. He smiled warmly, keeping his voice low so as not to wake the sleeping baby. The final paperwork for the Children's Hospital Trust just cleared escrow, Juliet, he said, his eyes reflecting genuine pride. The $5 million philanthropic deal is completely finalized. The Vanguard Foundation is now the primary benefactor for the new neonatal intensive care wing. You successfully secured the entire funding structure. Thank you, Elias, I replied softly. That wing is going to save thousands of families from feeling terrified and helpless. It is exactly what this money was always meant to do. Elias nodded, reaching out to gently touch the edge of my son's blanket. You built an incredible legacy for him. You took a burning building and turned it into an absolute fortress. We are all incredibly proud of you. He stepped back inside to rejoin the celebration, leaving me alone with my son on the quiet balcony. I shifted my son's weight in my arms. The sterile hospital suite where I had dismantled Carter's entire universe felt like a distant, fading memory, now a necessary storm that had ultimately cleared the path for this beautiful new dawn. I had successfully severed the rotting branches of the past, ensuring that my son would grow up in the bright, nurturing sunlight of truth and absolute freedom. A gentle breeze swept across the balcony, rustling the leaves of the potted olive trees I had carefully arranged near the glass railing. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting the profound tranquility of the evening wash completely over my spirit. There were no more secrets to hide, no more toxic egos to carefully manage, and no more apologies to make for simply existing. I had fought a silent war against a family of narcissistic predators, and I had emerged completely victorious. I opened my eyes and looked out over the glowing city one last time, my heart full, my spirit unbroken, and my soul perfectly at peace. The story we just witnessed is a powerful reminder that our true value is never defined by how others choose to treat us. For years, Juliet was diminished, treated as a background character, an unpaid bookkeeper, and a mere pawn in her husband's narcissistic game. Carter and his mother Beatrice mistook her quiet loyalty for weakness and her patience for submission. But as we saw, true strength doesn't always need to announce itself. When you find yourself in a situation where you are constantly undervalued, the most profound thing you can do is silently invest in yourself. Juliet didn't waste her energy begging for respect from people who were committed to misunderstanding her. Instead, she gathered her resources, protected her peace, and meticulously built her own fortress. She knew her worth long before she laid those corporate acquisition documents on the glass table. The ultimate lesson here is about reclaiming your sovereignty. You do not have to accept the role of the silent supporter to someone else's toxic ego. Financial independence, strategic boundaries, and a deep, unwavering belief in your own capabilities are your absolute greatest weapons. When the time comes to walk away from the wreckage of a one-sided relationship, you will not be starting over. You will be stepping into the immense power you have been cultivating all along. And as Juliet found on her sunlit balcony, the best revenge is simply living a beautiful, thriving life, surrounded by a chosen family who genuinely cherishes you. Have you ever been deeply underestimated by the people closest to you, only to completely surprise them by reclaiming your power and forging your own path? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey of sweet revenge and self-discovery resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more empowering stories. Remember, your worth is inherent, and your ultimate comeback is always entirely within your control.